This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. That is, until I got a strange call from my mom one evening. She sounded nervous, hesitant. "Honey, there's something I need to tell you," she began. My stomach dropped. Those words are never followed by good news. What came next shocked me to my core. Apparently, I had a half-sister I'd never known about. My dad had a brief relationship before meeting my mom, resulting in a child he never knew existed. The woman had kept it a secret all these years, but now that her daughter was an adult, she felt compelled to reach out and let my dad know. I was floored. How could I have a sibling out there that I never even knew about? For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about her. What was she like? Did we look alike? Would she want to meet me? I scoured social media trying to find any trace of her, but with only a first name to go on, I came up empty-handed. Then, out of the blue, I got a Facebook friend request from someone named Jessica Martinez. The profile picture showed a young woman who looked strikingly similar to me. My heart raced as I clicked to view the profile. Could this be her? The information was sparse, but it mentioned she lived in LA and was around my age. I sent a message, trying to play it cool while fishing for information. We chatted back and forth, and she eventually confirmed that yes, she was my long-lost sister. I was elated. After a few days of messaging, Jessica suggested we meet up in person. She proposed a park on the east side of the city that I wasn't familiar with. I was a bit hesitant about meeting a stranger, even if she was supposedly family, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. The night before our planned meet-up, I mentioned it to my roommate Alexis while we were having dinner. Her reaction caught me off guard. "Wait, which park did you say?" When I told her, her eyes went wide. "Are you crazy? That area is super dangerous. It's totally controlled by gangs. You can't go there alone." A chill ran down my spine. Why would Jessica suggest meeting somewhere so sketchy? I started to get a sinking feeling that something wasn't right. Alexis and I stayed up late into the night, digging deeper into Jessica's Facebook profile and the bits of information I had. The more we looked, the more suspicious things seemed. The profile had only been created a few weeks ago. There were hardly any photos or posts, and some of the details didn't quite add up with what my mom had told me about my supposed sister. With a growing sense of dread, I realized I had nearly walked into a very dangerous situation. But who was behind this fake profile? And why were they trying to lure me to that park? The whole thing felt like a surreal nightmare. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, I was a jittery, paranoid mess. I kept imagining what might have happened if I'd gone to that park alone. The scenario played out in gruesome detail in my mind, being jumped by gang members, robbed, or worse. I called the police to report the suspicious activity, but they basically told me there wasn't much they could do since no actual crime had occurred. I felt helpless and scared. What if this person tried to contact me again? What if they showed up at my apartment or school? For the next few weeks, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I changed my routines, varied the times I left for class, asked friends to walk with me at night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. During this time, I was also wrestling with complicated emotions about my real half-sister. Part of me still desperately wanted to find her and connect, but another part was terrified that reaching out might somehow put me in danger again. Eventually, I confided in a friend from my criminal law class named Mike. He had connections with a private investigator and offered to help me look into finding my actual sister, safely this time. It took a few weeks, but Mike's PI contact was able to track down my sister's real information. Her name was actually Ashley, and she lived across town in Pasadena. With shaking hands, I dialed the number the PI had given me. When Ashley answered, I almost couldn't speak. I managed to stammer out who I was and why I was calling. There was a long pause, and then she started crying. She had always wondered if she had siblings out there. We talked for hours that first night and agreed to meet for coffee a few days later. Seeing Ashley in person was surreal. It was like looking in a mirror. We had the same eyes, the same smile. We hugged and both burst into tears. Over the next few hours, we shared stories and started to get to know each other. It felt like finding a missing piece of myself. But even as I was overjoyed to connect with Ashley, I couldn't shake the lingering fear and paranoia from my experience with the fake profile. Who was that person, and what were their intentions? Why did they target me specifically? I may never know the answers. It's been several months now, and Ashley and I have grown quite close. She's become a true sister to me. But I still find myself looking over my shoulder sometimes, wondering if danger is lurking around the corner. That brush with the unknown left a mark on me that I don't think will ever fully fade. I'm sharing this story as a warning to others. Be careful who you trust online, even if they claim to be family. Trust your instincts if something feels off, and never agree to meet a stranger alone, especially somewhere unfamiliar. I was lucky. My story had a happy ending, but I shudder to think how differently things could have gone. It was a typical Saturday afternoon in my quiet suburban neighborhood. I decided to take a walk to clear my head after arguing with my parents about something trivial, probably my curfew or grades. I remember feeling annoyed and wanting some fresh air. As I strolled down the familiar streets, lost in my own thoughts, I barely noticed the well-dressed man walking towards me. He looked like he could be someone's dad heading home from work. Nice suit, briefcase, nothing out of the ordinary. I gave him a polite nod as we were about to pass each other. That's when everything changed in an instant. He suddenly grabbed my arm with a grip so tight it made me gasp. Before I could even process what was happening, he started dragging me towards a car parked nearby. My mind went blank with shock and terror. This couldn't be real, right? This kind of thing didn't happen in our safe little neighborhood. But it was happening. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to pull away, but he was so much stronger. My legs felt like jelly as panic took over. In that moment, I was certain I was about to disappear forever. Just as he was about to shove me into the back seat of the car, I heard a shrill voice pierce the air. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I turned my head to see a disheveled woman running towards us, waving her arms wildly. She looked rough, ratty clothes, messy hair, clearly not from our neighborhood. But in that moment, she was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. The man hesitated for a split second, his grip loosening just slightly. It was enough for me to wrench my arm free and stumble backwards. The woman was still yelling, drawing attention from nearby houses. People were starting to peek out their windows. The man muttered something under his breath, then quickly got into his car and sped off. Just like that, it was over. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like an eternity. I collapsed onto the sidewalk, my legs finally giving out as the adrenaline wore off. The woman who saved me crouched down beside me, asking if I was okay. Up close, I could see how gaunt and sickly she looked. track marks on her arms, teeth in bad shape, classic signs of long-term drug use. But her eyes were kind and full of concern. She helped me up and walked me home, staying with me until my parents arrived. They were horrified when I told them what happened, immediately calling the police. But the man was long gone by then. In all the chaos that followed, police reports, victim counseling, my parents hardly letting me out of their sight, I never got a chance to properly thank the woman who saved me. She disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Life went on. I graduated high school, went to college, started building a career. But I never forgot that day, or the woman who intervened. I often wondered what became of her. Then, about a month ago, something incredible happened. I was volunteering at a local homeless shelter, serving meals, when I saw her. Older now, even more weathered, but unmistakably the same woman. She didn't recognize me at first, but when I told her who I was, her eyes lit up with recognition. We talked for hours that day. Her name was Lisa, and she'd been battling drug addiction for most of her adult life. That day she saved me. She'd been in the neighborhood looking for a fix. She said seeing me in danger had sparked something in her, a protective instinct she didn't know she had. Hearing her story, I felt compelled to help her the way she'd helped me. I told her about a rehab program I knew of, offering to sponsor her if she was willing to try. To my surprise and joy, she agreed. It wasn't easy. The first few weeks were rough as she went through withdrawal. There were times she wanted to give up, but I visited her regularly, encouraging her to keep going. Slowly but surely, she started to improve. As she got cleaner, more of her personality emerged. She was funny, kind, and incredibly resilient. She told me about the daughter she'd lost custody of years ago due to her addiction. It became her goal to get clean so she could reconnect with her now adult child. Last week, Lisa completed the 90-day program. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, watching her accept her sobriety chip. But the best was yet to come. With the help of a social worker, we managed to track down Lisa's daughter. After some initial hesitation, she agreed to meet with her mom. I was there for their reunion, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Seeing them embrace, years of pain and separation melting away, I was struck by the strange twists of fate that had brought us to this moment. If Lisa hadn't been in that neighborhood that day, looking for drugs, I might not be here. And if I hadn't been in that shelter that day, Lisa might still be on the streets. I don't know what the future holds for Lisa and her daughter. Rebuilding a relationship after so much time apart won't be easy, but watching them together, tentatively beginning to reconnect, I felt a sense of hope I can't quite describe. As for me, I'm still processing everything that's happened. The terror of that almost kidnapping never fully went away, but it's been tempered now by this incredible turn of events. I'm left with a profound sense of how interconnected our lives can be, and how a single moment of courage, even from the most unexpected source, can change everything. I'm sharing this story not just to get it off my chest, but in the hope that it might inspire others. You never know how your actions might impact someone's life. And it's never too late for redemption, for second chances, for healing. To anyone out there struggling with addiction or its effects on your family, don't give up. Help can come from the most unexpected places. And to everyone else, be kind, be brave, step in if you see someone in trouble. You never know whose life you might save, or how that person might end up saving you right back. The event started off great on Saturday morning. About 50 of us gathered at a campground deep in the woods, all decked out in our fantasy costumes and ready for some role-play action. I was playing an elven ranger, complete with a green cloak and prop bow. My friends Jake and Mia were there too, as a dwarf warrior and human mage. The organizers explained the basic plot. We were all adventurers seeking a magical artifact hidden somewhere in the forest. We'd have to solve puzzles, fight monsters, other costumed players, and compete with rival factions to find it first. Sounded like a blast. For the first few hours, it was a ton of fun running around the woods, getting into character, and playing out scenes. But then I started noticing this one guy, probably in his 30s, who kept appearing wherever I went. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but it quickly became clear he was deliberately following me. He introduced himself as Greg and said his character was a rogue who wanted to team up. I politely declined, saying I already had a group, but he kept hanging around, always finding excuses to be near me. It was starting to make me uncomfortable. During a break for lunch, I mentioned it to Jake and Mia. They agreed it seemed weird and said they'd keep an eye out. We decided to stick together after that. But somehow, Greg always managed to find moments when I was briefly separated from my friends. He'd suddenly pop out from behind a tree or show up when I went to refill my water bottle. Each time he'd try to engage me in conversation or suggest we pair up for the next challenge. I kept refusing, but he wouldn't take the hint. His behavior got progressively more aggressive as the day went on. He started making comments about my costume, saying things like, "That cloak really shows off your figure," and "You're the prettiest elf in the forest." It made my skin crawl. At one point, I got separated from Jake and Mia during a chaotic battle scene. Suddenly, Greg was there, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me away, saying, "Quick, I know a shortcut to the next clue." I yanked my arm free and said firmly, "Do not touch me." He backed off, but the predatory look in his eyes scared me. I found my friends and stuck close to them after that. We told a few other players about the situation, and they agreed to help run interference. But Greg was persistent. He kept finding excuses to be near me, always watching from a distance if he couldn't get close. As it started getting dark, I was really on edge. The forest that had seemed so fun and magical earlier now felt ominous. Every rustle in the bushes made me jump, worried it was Greg trying to catch me alone again. The final event was a nighttime scavenger hunt. We were all given glow sticks and had to search the woods for hidden objects. I made sure to stay with a big group, but at one point I stepped away briefly to check behind a big rock formation. Suddenly a hand grabbed my shoulder, and I let out a terrified shriek. It was Greg. He put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Shh, don't alert the others. I found the artifact. Come with me and we can win together." I tried to back away, but he grabbed my wrist. "Let go of me," I yelled, struggling to break free. He tried to clamp his other hand over my mouth. Thankfully, Jake and some other players heard my shout and came running. Greg immediately let go and tried to play it off like we were just acting out a scene. But I was shaking and on the verge of tears. Jake and the others formed a protective circle around me. One of them ran to get the event organizer. Greg tried to slink away, but they stopped him. When the organizer arrived, we all told him what had been happening. He was horrified and immediately ejected Greg from the event. Apparently, there had been complaints about him at past events too, but nothing this severe. They escorted Greg to his car and made him leave. The organizer profusely apologized to me and promised Greg would be permanently banned from all future events. I was pretty shaken up for the rest of the night. Even though I knew he was gone, I kept imagining I saw shadows moving in the woods or heard footsteps behind me. My friends stayed close and helped me feel safe. The next morning, as we were packing up to leave, I overheard some other players talking. Apparently, Greg had snuck back onto the grounds overnight and was caught lurking around the women's camping area. He ran off when security spotted him. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I'm still processing everything that happened that weekend. What should have been a fun fantasy escape turned into a real-life horror story. I keep replaying it in my mind, wondering if there were warning signs I missed early on, or things I could have done differently. Part of me wants to swear off LARPing forever now, but I'm trying not to let one creep ruin something I used to love. My friends have been really supportive and say they'll always have my back at future events. I did file a police report, just to have it on record in case Greg ever tries anything again. But it's frustrating knowing there's not much they can do unless he actually attacks someone. I'm definitely going to be a lot more cautious at events from now on. No more wandering off alone, that's for sure. And I might invest in some self-defense classes too. It's scary to think there are people out there who would use a fun, imaginary game as cover for such predatory behavior. I'm grateful it didn't escalate even further, but I still feel violated and unsafe. I keep having nightmares about being chased through dark woods. Sometimes I wake up in a panic, thinking I hear someone outside my window. I know it's just my mind playing tricks, but it feels so real in the moment. I'm trying to stay positive and not let fear control my life. But I don't think I'll ever be able to enjoy a fantasy role-playing event the same way again. That sense of carefree escapism has been tainted now that I know the monsters aren't always just pretend. I hope sharing my experience might help others stay safe. Trust your instincts if someone is making you uncomfortable. Don't worry about being nice or not making a scene. And always, always stay with your friends and watch out for each other. What happened to me could happen to anyone. I never thought I'd be in that situation, but predators can show up anywhere, even in what should be safe, fun spaces. Stay alert, stick together, and don't hesitate to report creepy behavior. It could save you or someone else from going through what I did. I'm still processing and healing, but I'm determined not to let Greg win by giving up the things I enjoy. I may be more cautious now, but I won't let fear rule my life. There are good people out there too, and I'm grateful for the friends who had my back when I needed them most. Stay safe out there, everyone. And if you ever see someone in a situation like mine, please speak up and help. Together we can make our communities and events safer for everyone. There was a loud thud, followed by what sounded like muffled shouting. My heart started racing as I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, straining my ears. Should I call the police? What if it was nothing and I embarrassed myself? As a single mom, I was always hyper-aware of safety, but I also didn't want to overreact. I convinced myself it was probably just the TV, or maybe Ben had friends over. Still, something felt off. I peeked out the front window, but didn't see anything unusual on our quiet street. No strange cars or people lurking about. I double-checked that all the doors were locked, then tried to distract myself by doing some laundry. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. Around midnight, I heard more commotion, shuffling noises, a car door slamming, an engine starting up. I crept to the window again, but only caught a glimpse of taillights disappearing down the street. My mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. Had someone broken in? Was Ben hurt? Should I go check on him? I picked up my phone to call the police, but hesitated. What if I was overreacting and woke up the whole neighborhood for nothing? Ben would think I was some paranoid, nosy neighbor. Plus, I couldn't leave Lily alone to go investigate. In the end, I decided to wait until morning. I tossed and turned all night, jumping at every little sound. As soon as the sun came up, I threw on some clothes and headed next door. My stomach dropped when I saw Ben's front door slightly ajar. I called out his name but got no response. With shaking hands, I pushed the door open wider and gasped. The house was completely ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, glass shattered everywhere. "Ben?" I shouted, panic rising in my voice. "Ben, are you here?" I heard a muffled sound coming from the bedroom and rushed in. There was Ben, tied to a chair with duct tape over his mouth. His face was bruised and swollen, eyes wide with fear. I quickly untied him and removed the tape. "Oh my God, Ben, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked, hands shaking as I worked on the knots. Ben coughed and winced in pain. "3 men broke in last night," he rasped. They tied me up and ransacked the place, took everything of value." I felt sick to my stomach. This had happened right next door while I was debating whether to call the police. I could have prevented this if I'd just trusted my instincts. "I'm so sorry, Ben. I heard noises last night, but I didn't know what to do. I should have called someone," I admitted, tears welling up in my eyes. But Ben shook his head. No, it's not your fault. You couldn't have known. I'm just glad you and Lily are safe." I was stunned by his concern for us when he was the one who'd been attacked. As I called 911 and waited for the police to arrive, the full gravity of the situation hit me. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a violent home invasion, and it had happened right next door to me and my young daughter. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews, paramedics checking Ben over, and crime scene investigators combing through the house. I couldn't stop shaking, imagining what could have happened if the intruders had decided to target our house instead. As they loaded Ben into an ambulance to get checked out at the hospital, he grabbed my hand. "Sarah, promise me you'll be careful. These guys, they knew too much about me, about the neighborhood. I don't think this was random." His words sent chills down my spine. What did he mean? Did he know something about why he was targeted? Before I could ask, the paramedics whisked him away. That night, I barely slept a wink. Every little noise had me jumping out of bed to check on Lily. I kept replaying the events in my mind, tormented by guilt and fear. What if the intruders came back? What if they targeted us next time? The next morning, I was a zombie as I got Lily ready for school. As we stepped outside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, scratched into our front door, was a strange symbol, a circle with jagged lines through it. It hadn't been there the day before. With trembling fingers, I snapped a photo and sent it to the detective handling Ben's case. Within minutes, my phone rang. "Mrs. Thompson, where are you right now?" the detective asked urgently. I'm outside my house. I just found this symbol." "Get back inside immediately and lock all the doors and windows. We're sending a patrol car to your location now." My heart was pounding as I rushed Lily back inside, triple-checking every lock. What was happening? Was this symbol connected to Ben's attack? As we huddled in the living room waiting for the police, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Something sinister had invaded our quiet little neighborhood, and I was terrified of what might come next. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the morning quiet. 2 officers swept through the house while another examined the symbol on our door. I held Lily close, trying to stay calm for her sake, but inside I was falling apart. "Mrs. Thompson, "We're going to need you and your daughter to come down to the station," one of the officers said gravely. "We have reason to believe you may both be in danger." As we were escorted to the police car, I noticed several of our neighbors peeking out their windows, whispering to each other. News travels fast in a small community like ours. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like we were on display. At the station, we were taken to a small conference room where the detective from Ben's case was waiting. He introduced himself as Detective Reeves and got straight to the point. "Mrs. Thompson, the symbol found on your door is associated with a dangerous criminal organization we've been tracking," he explained. "We believe your neighbor, Mr. Harrison, may have gotten involved with them somehow." My mind was reeling. Ben? Involved with criminals? It didn't make sense. He was just a quiet, middle-aged accountant who kept to himself. But why would they target us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Detective Reeves leaned forward, his expression grim. "We think they may believe you witnessed something the night of the break-in. Even if you didn't actually see anything, they might perceive you as a threat." I felt the blood drain from my face. All those noises I'd heard that night, had I unknowingly seen or heard something crucial? The next few hours were a whirlwind of questions, statements, and growing fear. They asked about every detail of that night, every interaction I'd ever had with Ben. By the end, I felt like I was drowning in paranoia. Every casual conversation with Ben now seemed sinister in hindsight. Had he been trying to warn me, or worse, involve me in something dangerous? As the day wore on, Lily grew restless and scared. She didn't understand what was happening, only that something was very wrong. I tried to comfort her, but how could I when I was barely holding it together myself? Finally, Detective Reeves returned with news that made my stomach churn. "We're going to need to place you and your daughter in protective custody," he said solemnly, "at least until we can determine the full extent of the threat against you." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Leave our home? Our entire lives? But as I looked at Lily's frightened face, I knew we had no choice. Whatever was happening, keeping her safe was all that mattered. Within hours, we were whisked away to a safe house on the outskirts of the city. As we drove away from everything familiar, I couldn't help but wonder, would we ever be able to return to our normal lives? Or had that one fateful night changed everything forever? The safe house was a small, nondescript bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was meant to blend in, to not draw attention. But to me it felt like a prison. The windows were reinforced, the doors had multiple locks, and there were cameras covering every angle of the property. 2 police officers were stationed outside 24/7. Lily was confused and upset, not understanding why we couldn't go home or see her friends. I did my best to make it seem like an adventure, but she wasn't buying it. The fear and stress were taking their toll on both of us. Days turned into weeks with no real progress on the case. Detective Reeves visited regularly to update us, but there wasn't much to say. Ben had been released from the hospital but had gone off the grid. The police couldn't find any concrete evidence linking him to criminal activity, but the symbol on our door was undeniably connected to a dangerous organization. I spent my days pacing the small house, jumping at every sound, and trying to keep Lily occupied. The police had brought some of our things from home, but it wasn't the same. I missed our life, our routines, our freedom. One night, about 3 weeks into our stay, I was jolted awake by a noise. At first, I thought it was just another nightmare. I'd been having plenty of those. But then I heard it again, a soft scratching sound coming from the living room. My heart pounding, I crept out of bed and peeked into Lily's room. She was sound asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. I quietly closed her door and tiptoed towards the living room, grabbing a heavy flashlight as a makeshift weapon. As I rounded the corner, I saw a shadow move across the wall. Someone was in the house. I opened my mouth to scream for the officers outside, but before I could make a sound, a hand clamped over my mouth. "Shh, Sarah." "It's me," a familiar voice whispered. I spun around, my eyes wide with shock. It was Ben. He looked terrible, gaunt, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, but it was undeniably him. "Ben, what are you doing here? How did you find us?" I hissed, my mind racing. He glanced nervously towards the windows. "I don't have much time. I had to warn you. They're coming." "Who's coming? Ben, what's going on?" He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes wild with fear. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant for you to get involved in this. But they think you know something, and they won't stop until they're sure." "Know what? Ben, please, you're scaring me," I pleaded. He opened his mouth to respond, but suddenly froze. Outside, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. "They're here," Ben whispered, his face pale. "Sarah, listen to me. In my house, there's a hidden safe behind the painting in the study. The combination is 17 to 923. Everything you need to know is in there. Promise me you'll find it." Before I could respond, there was a loud crash as the front door burst open. Ben shoved me towards Lily's room. "Run! Get Lily and run!" Everything after that was chaos. Shouting, gunshots, the sound of breaking glass. I scooped up a terrified Lily and ran for the back door, my heart feeling like it would explode out of my chest. We made it to the car and I drove blindly, no destination in mind except away. Away from the safe house, away from the danger, away from the life we once knew. As the sun rose, I found myself parked at a rest stop, Lily asleep in the back seat. My phone was filled with missed calls from Detective Reeves. I knew I should call him back, tell him what happened. But Ben's words echoed in my mind. What was in that safe? What had Ben gotten himself into that had put us all in danger? And most importantly, what did I do now? As I sat there, watching the morning traffic start to build, I realized our lives would never be the same. That one night, those strange noises I'd dismissed had set off a chain of events that had shattered our world. I didn't have any answers, only questions. But I knew one thing for certain. I had to protect Lily. Whatever it took, whatever I had to do, I would keep her safe, even if it meant leaving everything behind and starting over. With shaking hands, I started the car. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we couldn't go back. As I pulled onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror at my sleeping daughter and made a silent promise. We would survive this. We had to. It was around 9 p.m. when I got there. The pizza shop is in this little strip mall on the edge of town, right where it starts to get wooded. There were only a couple other cars in the lot, and I parked towards the back since I was just running in and out. I remember thinking it was unusually dark and quiet for a Friday night, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I ran in, paid for my pizza, and headed back out to my car. That's when things got weird. As I was walking across the parking lot, I had this sudden feeling like I was being watched. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck? Yeah, it was like that. I quickened my pace a bit, glancing around, but I didn't see anyone. When I got to my car, I set the pizza box on the roof so I could fish my keys out of my pocket. That's when I heard it, this weird shuffling sound coming from behind the dumpster near my car. I froze, keys in hand, straining to listen. For a second I thought maybe it was just the wind, or some garbage shifting around. But then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head slowly, and I swear my heart stopped for a second. There was a man crouched behind the dumpster, peeking around the edge at me. But here's the crazy part. He was completely naked. And I don't mean like stripped down to his underwear. I mean buck-freaking naked, not a stitch of clothing on him. I stood there in shock for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. The guy was filthy, covered in dirt and what looked like leaves or pine needles. His hair was long and matted, hanging in his face. But what really got me were his eyes. They were wide and wild-looking, almost feral. I don't know who moved first, him or me. But suddenly he was lunging towards me, and I was scrambling to get my car door open. I dropped my keys in panic and bent to grab them. When I straightened up, the naked guy was right there, barely 2 feet away from me. I yelled something, probably just incoherent noise, honestly. I was terrified. But instead of attacking me like I thought he would, the guy reached past me and grabbed the pizza box off my car roof. Then he took off running towards the woods at the edge of the lot, pizza box clutched to his chest. I stood there in complete disbelief, watching this nude dude disappear into the trees with my dinner. It was so absurd that for a second I wondered if I was dreaming or hallucinating. But the smell of the pizza lingering in the air and the scrape on my hand from where I'd fumbled my keys told me this was very real. Once the initial shock wore off, I got in my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sat there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? I mean, a naked pizza thief sounds like a bad joke, not a real crime. In the end, I decided to just get the hell out of there. I drove home in a daze, constantly checking my rearview mirror like I expected to see the guy chasing after my car. When I got home, I double-checked all my doors and windows before I could even think about relaxing. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to make sense of it. Who was this guy? Where did he come from? Was he homeless? On drugs? Escaped from somewhere? And why the hell did he want my pizza so bad? The next day, I drove back to the pizza place in the daylight. I don't know what I expected to find, but I guess I thought there might be some evidence of what happened. But there was nothing. No footprints, no pizza box, nothing. It was like it never happened. I ended up telling a couple friends about it, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. I mean, I get it. It sounds insane. If someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were making it up or exaggerating. But I know what I saw. For weeks afterward, I was jumpy and paranoid. I avoided going out at night if I could help it. When I did have to go somewhere after dark, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that wild-eyed naked man again. It's been 2 months now, and I still get a little freaked out when I think about it. I've never seen the guy again, never heard any news reports about a nude man in the woods or anything like that. It's like he just appeared out of nowhere for that one bizarre moment and then vanished back into the night. I still order pizza sometimes, but I always get it delivered now. And I tip the delivery drivers extra, because hey, you never know what kind of weird shit they might run into out there. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night. Was it just some random homeless guy having a mental health crisis? A prank gone way too far? Some kind of bizarre initiation ritual? I've come up with 1,000 explanations in my head, but none of them quite fit. All I know is that it happened, and it scared the crap out of me. I'm not typically the jumpy type, but this experience really shook me. It's a reminder that you never really know what might be lurking in the shadows, even in seemingly safe, everyday places. Sometimes I wonder what became of that guy. Did he enjoy the pizza? Is he still out there in the woods somewhere? Does he make a habit of stealing food from unsuspecting people? Part of me hopes I never find out the answers to these questions, but another part of me is still curious, still trying to make sense of that surreal encounter. I guess the moral of the story is, always be aware of your surroundings. Don't take your safety for granted, even in familiar places. Or maybe just get your pizza delivered. Either way, I know I'll never look at a late-night pizza run the same way again. And if you're ever in my town and see a naked guy running through the woods with a pizza box, well, now you know the backstory. Just don't expect the cops to believe you if you report it. Trust me on that one. It all started about a month into the fall semester. I had just joined the university's running club and was really enjoying the camaraderie and stress relief of our group jogs around campus. One day after practice, I noticed a guy from the track team watching me as I stretched and chatted with some friends. He was tall and athletic with dark hair, probably a junior or senior. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just scoping out potential recruits for the competitive team. But then I started seeing him everywhere. In the dining hall when I'd grab lunch between classes, at the library when I was studying late at night, even at the little coffee shop off campus where I like to do homework on weekends. It was unsettling how often our paths seemed to cross, given how large the university was. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but deep down, my instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. The way he'd stare at me from across the room, how he always seemed to position himself where he could see me. It made my skin crawl. Things escalated about 2 weeks later. I was walking back to my dorm after a late study session when I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw him about 20 feet away, matching my pace. My heart started racing, and I picked up speed, taking a few random turns to try to lose him. But he was always there, lingering just far enough back that I couldn't confront him without seeming paranoid. I finally made it back to my building and fumbled with my key card, hands shaking. As the door clicked shut behind me, I caught a glimpse of him standing across the street, watching. I ran up to my room and burst into tears, the fear and tension finally overwhelming me. From that point on, I was constantly on edge. I started varying my routines, taking different paths to class, and asking friends to walk with me at night. But he always seemed to find me. I'd be sitting in the quad between classes and spot him lurking behind a tree, pretending to read, or I'd be at a party and catch him staring at me through the window. The breaking point came when I was scrolling through Instagram one night and saw dozens of candid photos of myself pop up on my feed. Photos of me running, studying in the library, getting coffee, all taken without my knowledge. My blood ran cold as I realized he'd created a fake account to post these. The captions were even worse, things like, "My beautiful angel," and "Soon we'll be together." I immediately reported and blocked the account, my hands trembling. After that, I locked down all my social media and lived in constant fear of what he might do next. I stopped going to running club, avoided the dining hall, and barely left my dorm except for classes. My grades started slipping, and I withdrew from my friends, too ashamed and scared to tell anyone what was happening. One particularly bad night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing. I had 37 missed calls from an unknown number. As I stared at the screen in horror, a text came through. "I'm outside your window. Let me in." I froze, too terrified to even breathe. Then I heard a tapping sound and nearly screamed. Shaking uncontrollably, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There he was, standing on the lawn 4 stories below, staring up at me with an eerie smile. I stumbled back and called campus security, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The next day, I finally broke down and told my RA what had been happening. She immediately took me to the dean's office, where I filed an official report. They promised to investigate and offered to move me to a different dorm, but it felt like too little too late. The damage was done. I no longer felt safe anywhere on campus. For weeks, I jumped at every sound and shadow. I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced he was in my room. Even after they identified him and issued a no-contact order, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was like he had crawled inside my head and made a home there. As the semester went on, the overt stalking seemed to die down, but I never fully relaxed. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of someone who looked like him in a crowd, and my heart would stop. Or I'd get a blank text from an unknown number and spend the next hour in a panic attack. Even now, months later, I'm not the same person I was before. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, analyzing every interaction for hidden threats. I've lost my sense of security and struggle to trust anyone new. Some days I wonder if I'll ever feel truly safe again. The worst part is the lingering questions. Why me? What made him fixate on me out of all the students here? What would have happened if I hadn't reported him when I did? The uncertainty eats away at me. I try to remind myself that I'm strong, that I survived. But there are still nights when I bolt awake, heart pounding, sure that he's outside my window. In those moments, I feel just as helpless and afraid as I did that first night I realized I was being followed. I know rationally that he's gone, that it's over. But emotionally, I'm still that terrified freshman, never knowing when or where he'll appear next. I don't know if I'll ever fully shake that feeling. All I can do is take it day by day and hope that eventually the fear will fade. For now, I'm focusing on rebuilding my life. I've started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma. I'm slowly reconnecting with friends and trying to reclaim the college experience I was robbed of. But I'll always be looking over my shoulder, a part of me forever changed by those hellish months of being hunted. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, please don't suffer in silence like I did for so long. Reach out for help, document everything, and trust your instincts. No one deserves to live in fear like that. Stay safe out there. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I had decided to go for my usual jog through the local park. The leaves were just starting to change color, creating a beautiful tapestry of reds, oranges, and yellows. I put on my favorite running playlist and set off, feeling energized and ready to tackle the day. About halfway through my run, I noticed something odd in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was an old Toyota parked on the side of the path. That in itself wasn't too strange, but what caught my attention was the figure standing next to it. It was a clown, a full-on traditional circus clown with white face paint, a red nose, and a colorful wig. My heart started racing, and not just from the exercise. Something about the scene felt off. The clown was just standing there, motionless, holding a bunch of brightly colored balloons. It was like something out of a horror movie. I slowed down, unsure whether to keep going or turn back. As I cautiously approached, The clown turned to look at me. I froze in my tracks. His painted-on smile seemed more sinister than cheerful. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong here. Who goes to a park dressed as a clown at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday? I was about to turn and run when I heard a child's voice in the distance. "Mommy, look, a clown." A family emerged from a nearby picnic area, and the kids ran excitedly towards the clown. The tension in my body eased slightly as I realized this must be some kind of birthday party or event. The clown's demeanor changed instantly. He started juggling the balloons and making silly faces at the kids. I watched for a moment, feeling a bit foolish for getting so worked up. It was just a harmless entertainer after all. I shook my head, chuckling at my overactive imagination, and continued my run. But as I jogged away, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. Something about the clown's initial stillness and that empty stare just didn't sit right with me. I tried to push it out of my mind and focus on finishing my workout. The rest of my day went by normally, and I almost forgot about the strange encounter. Almost. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I kept replaying the scene in my head. The more I thought about it, the more certain details stood out as odd. Why was the clown there so early? The family didn't seem to be expecting him. And that car, it looked ancient, like something from the 70s. Not exactly the kind of vehicle a modern entertainer would use. I tossed and turned all night, unable to shake the memory of those cold, empty eyes staring at me from behind the painted smile. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't stop the chill that ran down my spine every time I pictured that clown. The next few days passed without incident, and the memory of the clown began to fade. I went back to my normal routine, including my morning runs in the park. But I always felt a bit on edge, scanning the area for any sign of that old Toyota or a flash of white face paint. About a week later, I was hanging out with some friends when someone suggested we watch a movie. We settled on an old horror flick from the 80s that none of us had seen before. As the opening credits rolled, I grabbed some popcorn and settled in for what I hoped would be a fun, cheesy scare. But about halfway through the movie, I nearly choked on my popcorn. There, on the screen, was a clown. And not just any clown. It was identical to the one I had seen in the park. The same makeup, the same costume, even the same creepy smile. My blood ran cold as I watched the character terrorize the protagonists. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Clowns often look similar, right? But as the movie progressed, I couldn't deny the uncanny resemblance. It wasn't just the makeup. It was the way the clown moved, the tilt of its head, even the way it held those balloons. It was exactly like what I had seen that morning in the park. My friends noticed my distress and paused the movie, asking if I was okay. I stammered out an explanation about seeing a similar clown recently, trying to play it off as a funny coincidence. But inside, my mind was racing. How could this be possible? The movie was decades old, long before the day I encountered the clown in the park. After my friends left, I couldn't resist doing some research. I looked up the movie online, searching for information about the clown character. What I found only deepened the mystery. The actor who had played the clown had died years ago. The costume was supposed to be one of a kind, created specifically for the film. I spent hours that night going down a rabbit hole of information about the movie, the actor, and even the history of clowns in horror. But nothing I found could explain what I had seen in the park. It was as if that clown had stepped right out of the movie and into reality. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I went for a run, I half expected to see that Toyota parked along the path, the clown waiting for me with his bunch of balloons. I tried talking to friends about it, but they all dismissed it as an overactive imagination or a strange coincidence. Some even suggested that maybe I had seen the movie before and forgotten about it, which would explain why the clown seemed so familiar. But I knew that wasn't the case. I had never seen that film before, and the encounter in the park had felt all too real. As time passed, the intensity of my fear began to fade, but the mystery remained. I never saw the clown again, and there were no reports of any similar sightings in the area. Life went on, and I tried to convince myself that there must be a logical explanation. But even now, years later, I can't forget that day in the park. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still see those eyes in my mind, cold, empty, and somehow ancient. I've never been able to fully explain what happened that day, or how a character from a decades-old movie could appear in real life. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, but I can't help wondering, what if it wasn't just a coincidence? What if somehow that clown was real? And if it was, what did it want? These questions haunt me, and I doubt I'll ever find the answers. One thing's for certain, though. I'll never look at clowns the same way again. And whenever I go for a run in the park, I always keep an eye out for any old Toyotas parked along the path, just in case. It all started about 6 months ago, when my dad disappeared without a trace. One day he was there, going about his normal routine, and the next, gone. No note, no warning signs, nothing. My mom was beside herself, and I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Dad was always the steady, reliable one in our family. The idea of him just up and leaving seemed impossible. We filed a missing persons report, of course, but the police didn't have much to go on. Weeks went by with no leads. I couldn't just sit around waiting anymore, so I decided to do some digging on my own. I'm only 19, but I felt like I had to do something, you know? I started by going through Dad's things, looking for any clues. At first there wasn't much, just normal stuff like work papers and old photos. But then I found an old journal tucked away in the back of his desk drawer. Most of it was pretty mundane, but there were a few cryptic entries that caught my eye. He kept mentioning a place called Wrigley and someone named Susan Calvert. I did some research online and discovered that Wrigley was a small town in northern Canada. As for Susan Calvert, she was a college student who went missing in the 1970s. The case had never been solved. I couldn't figure out what connection my dad could possibly have to all this, but it was the only lead I had. So I made the decision to travel to Wrigley. I told my mom I was going on a road trip with some friends to clear my head. I hated lying to her, but I didn't want to get her hopes up in case this turned out to be nothing. The drive to Wrigley took almost 2 days. It was the middle of nowhere, just endless forests and winding roads. When I finally arrived, I found a town that seemed frozen in time. Old wooden buildings, a single main street, and suspicious looks from the locals as I pulled up in my beat-up Honda Civic. I checked into the only motel in town and started asking around about my dad and Susan Calvert. At first, people were tight-lipped, but eventually I got some leads. The local sheriff, an older guy named Jim Hawkins, seemed particularly interested when I mentioned Susan's name. "Why are you asking about Susan Calvert?" he asked, eyeing me warily. I decided to be honest. "I'm looking for my father. He disappeared recently, and I found some notes he'd made about Susan in this town. I'm just trying to understand what's going on." Sheriff Hawkins was quiet for a long moment. then sighed. "Come with me, son. There's something you should see." He took me back to the sheriff's office and pulled out an old cardboard box from a filing cabinet. Inside were case files and evidence bags related to Susan's disappearance. But what really caught my attention was an old VHS tape. "This is your father's statement," Hawkins explained. "He was one of the last people to see Susan alive." My heart was pounding as we put the tape in an ancient VCR. The image was grainy, but I could clearly see my dad, so much younger, but unmistakably him. He looked scared and exhausted. "Start from the beginning," an off-screen voice said. Dad took a deep breath. "Susan and I were on a camping trip in the woods outside of town. We'd been dating for a few months. Everything was normal at first. We set up camp, went hiking, made s'mores by the fire. But on the second night, things got strange." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I woke up in the middle of the night to this weird sound. It was like, I don't know, like a cross between a bird call and a scream. Susan was already awake, staring out of the tent with this terrified look on her face. We saw shapes moving in the darkness. At first I thought it was just shadows from the trees, but then, God, I don't even know how to describe it. They weren't human, weren't animal, just these dark, shifting forms. Susan screamed, and they moved towards us so fast." Dad's voice was shaking now. "I grabbed Susan's hand and we ran. I don't know how long we ran for, but eventually we came to this clearing, and there was this light, not like sunlight or moonlight. It was green and pulsing. Susan, she walked towards it. I tried to stop her, but it was like she was in a trance. The shapes were all around us now. I could hear them making these chittering noises. Susan reached out towards the light, and then she was gone, just vanished. I think I blacked out after that. When I woke up, I was back at our campsite. No sign of Susan or those things." The tape ended there. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. Sheriff Hawkins was watching me closely. "Your father was the prime suspect for a while," he said. "But there was no evidence, and his story was so bizarre that eventually the case went cold. He left town soon after, and we never heard from him again. Until now, I guess." I felt like my whole world had been turned upside down. Do you believe him?" I asked. Hawkins sighed. "Son, I've been sheriff in this town for over 30 years. I've seen things in these woods that I can't explain. Your father's story? It's not the first time I've heard something like it, and it probably won't be the last." I left the sheriff's office with a copy of the case files and more questions than answers. Over the next few days, I talked to more locals, hiked out to where Dad and Susan had supposedly camped, and pored over every scrap of information I could find. Some of the older residents shared stories of strange lights in the woods, unexplained disappearances, and eerie sounds in the night. It all sounded like campfire stories and urban legends, but after seeing that tape of my dad, I couldn't dismiss it entirely. On my last night in Wrigley, I decided to camp out in the same spot where Dad and Susan had been. I know it was probably stupid and dangerous, but I felt like I had to do it. I needed to understand. As I sat by my small campfire, watching the shadows lengthen, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump, but nothing happened. No weird lights, no inhuman shapes, just an ordinary night in the woods. I was almost disappointed in a way. Part of me had been hoping for, I don't know, some kind of sign or revelation. Instead, I was left with more questions than ever. As I packed up to leave Wrigley the next morning, Sheriff Hawkins approached me. "Any luck?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not really. I'm more confused than ever." He nodded sympathetically. "Listen, son, whatever happened to your father, whatever he got mixed up in, it might be better to let sleeping dogs lie. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved." But I couldn't accept that. My dad was still out there somewhere, and now I knew he'd been carrying this bizarre secret for decades. I had to find him, had to understand what really happened all those years ago and why he'd disappeared now. So here I am, back home, but unable to let this go. I've got a wall covered in notes and maps, trying to piece together this insane puzzle. Mom thinks I'm losing it, and maybe I am. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm on the verge of uncovering something big. I'm planning another trip soon, this time to some of the other towns in the area where similar disappearances have been reported. I know it's dangerous, but I have to keep going. For Dad, for Susan, and for my own sanity. If anyone out there has experienced anything similar or has any information that might help, please reach out. And if you're in the woods at night and hear something that sounds like a bird's scream, run. Run as fast as you can. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I was at the diner having my usual coffee and eggs when I overheard some folks talking in hushed tones about an incident that had occurred the night before. Apparently, Jenny Miller's daughter, sweet little Emily, who was only in 9th grade, had been brutally attacked on her way home from volleyball practice. The details were sparse at first, but as the day went on, more information trickled out. Emily had been found unconscious in the alley behind the old hardware store, beaten so badly she needed surgery. The whole town was in shock. Nothing like this had ever happened here before. By Wednesday, the police were everywhere. They set up roadblocks, went door to door asking questions, and put out a call for any information. The town felt different, tense, on edge. Parents started picking up their kids from school instead of letting them walk home. The playground sat empty after dark. I remember seeing Sheriff Thompson at the grocery store that evening. The bags under his eyes told me he hadn't slept since it happened. When I asked how the investigation was going, he just shook his head and said, "We're doing everything we can, but so far we've got nothing solid to go on." As the days passed, the fear and paranoia only grew. People started eyeing their neighbors suspiciously, wondering if the attacker could be someone we all knew. The local gun shop reported a surge in sales. It felt like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then came Sunday. I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I was sitting in church, half listening to Pastor Mike's sermon about forgiveness and redemption. The irony of his words would only become apparent later. Halfway through the service, his son Tyler, a quiet kid in his early 20s who'd always seemed a bit odd, came stumbling in through the side door. He was disheveled, wild-eyed, and covered in what looked like blood. The congregation fell silent as Tyler made his way down the aisle, muttering incoherently. When he reached the pulpit, he fell to his knees in front of his father and began sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't hear what Tyler was saying, but I saw the color drain from Pastor Mike's face. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, Pastor Mike reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. The next few seconds were chaos. People screamed and ducked for cover as Pastor Mike fired 3 shots point-blank into his son's chest. Tyler slumped to the ground, and a pool of blood began to spread across the church floor. In the stunned silence that followed, Pastor Mike lowered the gun and spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. but somehow carried to every corner of the room. It was him. He hurt that poor girl. May God have mercy on his soul. The aftermath was surreal. The police arrived within minutes, but it was clear they were as shocked as the rest of us. Pastor Mike didn't resist when they took him into custody. He just kept repeating, "I did what had to be done." As the truth came out over the next few days, the town was divided. Some people were horrified by what Pastor Mike had done, saying he should have let the law handle it. But many others, more than you might expect, seemed to think he'd done the right thing. I overheard Mrs. Johnson at the post office saying, "Well, at least now that poor Miller girl and her family can have some peace." And old Mr. Harding down at the bait shop just nodded grimly when I mentioned it and said, "Sometimes a man's got to take justice into his own hands." The specifics of what drove Tyler to attack Emily, or how Pastor Mike discovered it was him, never came to light. Maybe it's better that way. Some things are too ugly to drag out into the open. What I do know is that our town will never be the same. The trust we once had in each other has been shattered. Every time I see a young man walking down the street, I can't help but wonder what darkness might be lurking beneath the surface. And yet, life goes on. Emily is recovering slowly but surely. Pastor Mike is awaiting trial, though rumor has it the DA is considering a plea deal. The church has a new pastor now, but attendance is way down. Sometimes I think about leaving, about packing up and moving somewhere where I don't know everyone's secrets and sorrows. But then I remember that evil can happen anywhere. At least here, we faced it head on. I still struggle with what happened that Sunday morning. Was it justice, or just another terrible crime? I don't know if I'll ever have an answer. All I know is that in one bloody moment, our innocent little town lost its innocence forever. The weight of it all still haunts me. I find myself lying awake at night, replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. How could Tyler, a boy I'd watched grow up, do something so heinous? And how could Pastor Mike, a man of God, take a life so coldly? But then I think about Emily, sweet, innocent Emily, who will carry the scars of that night, both physical and emotional, for the rest of her life. And I wonder if maybe, just maybe, Pastor Mike did what needed to be done. It's been months now, and on the surface things are starting to return to normal. The diner is full again for breakfast. Kids are back to playing in the park after school, and the nightly news has moved on to other stories. But underneath it all, there's a current of unease that never quite goes away. We've seen the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of even those we think we know best. How can we ever truly feel safe again? I've caught myself looking at my neighbors differently, wondering what secrets they might be hiding. It's an ugly feeling, this suspicion, but I can't seem to shake it. The trial is set to start next month. I'm not sure if I'll attend or not. Part of me wants to know every detail to try and understand how this could have happened. But another part of me is afraid of what I might learn. In the end, I suppose we'll all have to find our own way to move forward, to rebuild the trust that was shattered that Sunday morning, to find a way to feel safe in our homes again. But one thing's for certain. Our little town in Arkansas will never be the same. We've lost something precious, something we can never get back. And all we can do now is try to pick up the pieces and hope that someday, somehow, we'll find a way to heal. As I sit here writing this, I can't help but feel a mix of emotions. Sadness for what we've lost, anger at the senseless violence, fear of what might come next, but also a strange sort of resolve. We've been through hell, but we're still here, still standing, still trying to do right by each other. Maybe that's the best we can hope for in this world, to face the darkness head on, to stand together in the face of evil, and to never stop trying to be better than our worst impulses. I don't know what the future holds for our town, but I do know that we'll face it together, for better or worse, because that's what community is all about. And despite everything that's happened, that's one thing that will never change. I never thought I'd be the one writing one of these posts, but here I am. It's been over 25 years since that day in August 1996, and I still can't shake the memories or the questions that haunt me. I was just a 19-year-old kid then, home from my first year of college for the summer. Life seemed simple, you know. I had my whole future ahead of me, and I took for granted that my family would always be there. That all changed on August 15th. I remember it was a Thursday because I had plans to meet up with some high school buddies that evening. I got home from my summer job at the local grocery store around 4 p.m., expecting to find my mom in the kitchen starting dinner like usual. But the house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. "Mom?" I called out, dropping my backpack by the door. No answer. I figured she must have run to the store or something. I headed to the kitchen to grab a snack, and that's when I saw it. A note on the fridge in my mom's handwriting. "Jason, your father is gone. Don't ask me where. Don't look for him. Love, Mom." I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of the words. Gone? What did that mean? Had he left on a trip? But why would Mom tell me not to ask or look for him? It didn't add up. I tried calling my mom's cell, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with my dad's. A knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I paced around the house looking for any clues. My dad's car was gone from the driveway. His clothes were still in the closet. His wallet and keys weren't on the dresser where he usually left them. It was like he had just vanished into thin air. Hours passed, and my mom still wasn't home. I called my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, even my dad's work buddies. No one had seen or heard from either of my parents. By midnight, I was in full-blown panic mode. I barely slept that night. When my mom finally came home the next morning, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. I bombarded her with questions, but she just shook her head. "I told you in the note, Jason. Your father is gone. That's all you need to know." "But where did he go? Why? When is he coming back?" I pleaded. She snapped then, her voice rising. "He's not coming back. Don't you get it? He's gone for good, and we're better off without him. Now drop it." I was stunned into silence. I'd never seen my mom like this before. She was always so calm and level-headed. Seeing her so distraught and angry only intensified my fear and confusion. Over the next few days, I tried everything I could think of to get answers. I called the police, but they said they couldn't file a missing persons report since my mom insisted my dad had left voluntarily. I scoured the house for any clues, but found nothing out of the ordinary. My dad's boss said he'd simply not shown up for work that day. No explanation given. It was like my father had been erased from existence overnight. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who came to every Little League game, who helped me move into my dorm just months earlier, gone without a trace. I couldn't accept it. I knew there had to be more to the story, so I started digging. I combed through my dad's home office, looking for anything that might give me a lead. Bank statements, old letters, appointment books. Most of it was mundane stuff. But then I found an old newspaper clipping tucked into the back of a drawer. The headline read, "Local man questioned in disappearance of college student." My heart raced as I scanned the article. It was from 1975, over 20 years earlier. A young woman named Susan Calvert had vanished from her university campus, and my father, then just 25 years old, had been brought in for questioning. The article didn't give many details, just that my dad had been seen talking to Susan at a campus bar the night she disappeared. He was released without charges, and the case went cold. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Could this have something to do with my dad's sudden disappearance? Had the past finally caught up with him? I tried asking my mom about it, but she flew into a rage. "I told you to drop this, Jason. Why can't you just let it go?" But I couldn't let it go. I was determined to find out what happened to my father, no matter what. I spent the next few weeks in a frenzy of research. I dug up everything I could find about Susan Calvert's disappearance. I tracked down old newspaper articles, police reports, anything I could get my hands on. The more I learned, the more questions I had. Susan had been a 19-year-old sophomore at the local university. She was last seen leaving a campus bar called the Watering Hole around 11 p.m. on April 12, 1975. Witnesses reported seeing her talking to a man matching my father's description. She never made it back to her dorm room that night. Despite extensive searches, no trace of Susan was ever found. The case went cold after a few months. My dad was questioned, but never formally charged. He had an alibi. He claimed he'd left the bar alone and gone straight home. His roommate at the time corroborated his story. But something about it all didn't sit right with me. Why had this old case seemingly caused my dad to vanish into thin air 2 decades later? I knew I needed more information. I started reaching out to anyone who might have known Susan or been involved in the investigation. Most people didn't want to talk about it. It was ancient history to them. But finally, I got a lead. An old retired detective who'd worked the case agreed to meet with me. He was in his 70s now, living in a small town a few hours north. I made the drive on a crisp fall day, my mind racing with possibilities. Detective Miller was a gruff old guy, but his eyes were sharp. He listened patiently as I explained the situation with my dad. "I always had a feeling about your old man," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing we could prove, mind you, but there was something off about his story." He told me that my dad's alibi had checked out, but there were inconsistencies in his timeline. The roommate said my dad got home around midnight, but other witnesses placed him at the bar until nearly 1 a.m. "We brought him in for more questioning a few months later," Miller continued. "But he lawyered up real quick after that. Wouldn't say another word to us." I felt sick to my stomach. Had my father really been involved in this young woman's disappearance? And if so, why had it all come to a head now, after so many years? Detective Miller couldn't give me any concrete answers, but he did provide one last piece of information that would change everything. "There was a rumor going around back then," he said, his voice low. "Nothing we could substantiate. But word was, your dad had a cabin up north, way out in the boonies of Alberta. Might be worth looking into." I thanked the detective and left with my head spinning. A cabin in Alberta? My dad had never mentioned anything like that. But then again, there seemed to be a lot about my father I didn't know. I spent the next few days agonizing over what to do. Part of me wanted to just forget the whole thing, to accept that my dad was gone and try to move on with my life. But I knew I'd never be able to rest until I uncovered the truth. So I made a decision. I withdrew my savings, packed a bag, and set out for Alberta. I told my mom I was going on a road trip with friends. I hated lying to her, but I knew she'd never approve of what I was doing. The drive took days. I followed winding highways through dense forests and snow-capped mountains. The further north I went, the more isolated everything became. Towns grew smaller and farther apart. Cell service became spotty, then non-existent. I had only the vaguest idea of where I was going. Detective Miller hadn't been able to give me an exact location for the rumored cabin. I was operating on nothing more than a hunch and a desperate need for answers. After nearly a week of driving, I found myself on a narrow dirt road deep in the Alberta wilderness. My car bounced and jolted over the rough terrain. Dense pine forests pressed in on both sides. I hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. Just as I was starting to think I'd made a huge mistake, I saw it. A small, weathered cabin tucked back among the trees. My heart pounded as I pulled up and cut the engine. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the cabin. Was this really the place? And if so, what would I find inside? With shaking hands, I got out of the car and approached the cabin. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Weeds grew up around the foundation, and the windows were grimy with dust and cobwebs. I tried the door, fully expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it swung open with a creak. The interior was dark and musty. Dust motes swirled in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the dirty windows. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. The cabin was sparsely furnished, just a bed, a table, and a few chairs. But what caught my eye was the far wall. It was covered in newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes. My breath caught in my throat as I moved closer. There, in the center of it all, was a photo of Susan Calvert. She smiled out at me, young and beautiful and full of life. Surrounding her image were dozens of articles about her disappearance, maps with locations circled, scribbled notes I couldn't quite make out. My hands shook as I examined the wall. This was it, proof that my father had been involved somehow. But why? And where was he now? As I stood there trying to process it all, I heard a noise behind me. Footsteps on the porch. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun around. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the shadows of the cabin. "I wondered how long it would take you to find this place," a familiar voice said. My father emerged from the darkness, looking older and more haggard than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were haunted, filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Dad?" I whispered, unable to believe what I was seeing. He nodded slowly. "I think it's time we talked, son. There's a lot I need to tell you." And so, as the sun began to set over the Alberta wilderness, my father finally started to unravel the mystery that had consumed my life for the past months. But even as he spoke, I knew this was just the beginning. The truth, it turned out, was far more complex and terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a chilly autumn morning on the island of Hiiumaa, off the coast of Estonia. I had just moved there a few months prior for work, taking a job at the local fishing company. As an outsider, I was still getting used to the quirks and superstitions of the isolated island community. That morning, I woke up to the sound of foghorns blaring across the harbor. A thick blanket of mist had rolled in overnight, reducing visibility to almost nothing. As I got ready for work, I could hear my neighbors outside, their voices hushed and anxious. When I stepped out, Mrs. Tam from next door grabbed my arm. "Be careful out there today," she warned, her eyes wide. "The witches are stirring." I forced a polite smile, trying not to roll my eyes. I'd heard all about the island's legends of a vengeful coven of witches who supposedly cursed sailors and caused shipwrecks. It seemed like ridiculous superstition to me, but I nodded and thanked her for the warning. At the docks, the mood was tense. Fishermen huddled in small groups, speaking in low voices and casting wary glances at the fog-shrouded water. My co-worker Andres pulled me aside as I arrived. "Listen," he said urgently. "There's talk of canceling today's fishing runs. The signs are bad. Fog this thick hasn't been seen in years. And last night, old Martin swears he saw lights dancing over the western cliffs." I sighed, exasperated. "Come on, Andres. You can't seriously believe in all that witch nonsense. It's just fog." He shook his head gravely. "You're new here. You don't understand. These aren't just stories. There's truth to them. My own great-grandfather's ship was lost to their curse." Before I could argue further, our boss emerged from his office. "All right, listen up," he shouted. "I know you're all spooked, but we've got quotas to meet. We're going out as planned. Any man who stays behind forfeits his day's wages." There were grumbles of protest, but no one wanted to lose pay. Reluctantly, the crews began preparing their boats to head out. I could see the fear in their eyes, hands shaking as they untied mooring lines. As we motored out of the harbor, the fog swallowed us completely. I'd never seen anything like it. A wall of gray so thick I could barely see the bow of our small fishing trawler. The mood on board was somber and tense. No one spoke above a whisper. We'd been out for maybe an hour when things started to get weird. At first, it was just a feeling, a creeping sense of unease that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Then came the noises. Faint at first, almost imperceptible over the thrum of the engine, but growing louder, whispers, echoing laughter, the sound of something massive moving through the water beside us. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks, but when I saw the looks of terror on my crewmates' faces, I knew they heard it too. Suddenly, a scream rang out from the wheelhouse. I rushed up to find our captain, face pale as a ghost, pointing out the window. "There, do you see it?" At first, I saw nothing but fog. Then a shape began to emerge. My blood ran cold. It was impossible, but I was seeing it with my own eyes. A massive, ancient-looking ship was materializing out of the mist beside us. Its sails were in tatters, wood rotted and covered in seaweed, and on its deck, figures, dark, hunched shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. I heard Andres behind me, voice trembling as he made the sign of the cross. "The ghost ship," he whispered. "They've come for us." Before I could even process what I was seeing, our boat lurched violently. We were being pulled towards the phantom vessel, as if caught in some unnatural current. The rest happened in a blur of confusion and terror. Our engine died. Waves crashed over the deck. I heard screams as men were swept overboard. I clung to a railing for dear life as our small boat was tossed about like a toy. Through it all, that horrifying spectral ship loomed over us, those shadowy figures aboard it seeming to watch our struggle with cold indifference. Just when I was certain we were all about to die, everything stopped. The phantom ship vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The fog lifted. We found ourselves drifting in calm seas under a clear sky as if nothing had happened. But the horror wasn't over. As we took stock, we realized 3 of our crew were missing, swept away in the chaos. And carved into our hull was a crude symbol, a triangle with wavy lines. The mark of the sea witches, Andres told me with dread. We limped back to port, shaken to our cores. Word of what happened spread quickly. The whole island was in an uproar. Some families fled, fearing the curse had returned in full force. Others barricaded themselves in their homes. I spent that night huddled in my cottage, jumping at every creak and shadow. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation for what we'd experienced. some kind of shared hallucination brought on by fear and superstition. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. In the days that followed, search parties combed the waters for our missing crewmen, but no trace was ever found. More strange occurrences plagued the island. Livestock found mutilated, children speaking in tongues, eerie lights seen dancing over the western cliffs. I stuck it out for another month before I couldn't take it anymore. I quit my job and left Hielma, eager to put the whole nightmare behind me. But the memories of that day still haunt me. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, certain I can hear those ghostly whispers again. I've tried to find logical explanations for what happened. Maybe it was some kind of mass hysteria or elaborate hoax, but nothing fully accounts for what I experienced. All I know is that I'll never set foot on that island again. And to this day, the sound of foghorns sends a chill down my spine. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, most days I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know what I saw out there in that fog, and I'll never forget the day I learned that some legends are all too real. I still remember the day when everything changed. It was June 1940, and I was just a boy of 12. The Soviet troops rolled into Tallinn, their tanks rumbling down our cobblestone streets. At first, we didn't know what to make of it. Some people even cheered, thinking the Soviets would protect us from the Nazis. How wrong we were. Within weeks, the true nature of the occupation became clear. The secret police, the NKVD, began rounding up anyone deemed a threat: politicians, intellectuals, businessmen. My uncle Andres disappeared one night, taken from his home. We never saw him again. The Russification began almost immediately. Estonian was no longer allowed to be spoken in schools or government offices. Russian became mandatory. I remember sitting in class, struggling to understand my new textbooks written in Cyrillic. Our history was rewritten overnight. Suddenly we were told Estonia had always been part of Russia, that we had willingly joined the USSR. The demographic shift was staggering. Trainloads of Russians began arriving, settling in newly built concrete apartment blocks. Estonian families were forced to take in Russian lodgers. My parents had to give up our spare room to a surly Red Army officer. He would come home drunk and rant about Soviet glory. We learned to make ourselves scarce when he was around. By the 1950s, Tallinn was unrecognizable. The beautiful old town was crumbling from neglect, while ugly Soviet architecture sprouted up everywhere. The Estonian flag was banned. Our folk songs were silenced. Even our traditional foods became hard to find as the shelves were stocked with Russian products. The constant fear and paranoia was suffocating. You never knew who might be an informant for the KGB. People disappeared for the slightest infractions, telling the wrong joke, owning the wrong book. My childhood friend Mati's father was sent to Siberia for 10 years because someone reported hearing him criticize collective farming. As a young man, I was conscripted into the Soviet army. It was a miserable experience. The casual cruelty, the mind-numbing propaganda, the erasure of our identities. We weren't Estonians anymore, just Soviet citizens. I remember the shame of having to swear allegiance to a flag that had subjugated my homeland. After my service, I was assigned to work in the electronics factory in Narva. The working conditions were awful. Long hours, dangerous machinery, constant pressure to meet unrealistic quotas. Many of my co-workers were Russian transplants who looked down on us Estonians as backwards peasants. It was hard not to feel like a stranger in my own country. The hardest part was keeping our culture alive in secret. My grandmother would tell us old Estonian folk tales in hushed tones after dark. We'd sing our band national songs behind closed doors, always afraid someone might overhear. I taught my children Estonian, even though they had to speak Russian at school. It felt like our very existence as a people was being slowly extinguished. There were small acts of defiance. People would wear the blue, black, and white of the Estonian flag in subtle ways, a scarf, a piece of jewelry. We'd use code words to discuss forbidden topics. Underground newspapers and radio broadcasts kept hope alive, but the price of getting caught was steep. My neighbor spent 5 years in a gulag for possessing a pre-war Estonian history book. The surveillance was constant. Our mail was read, our phones tapped. KGB informants were everywhere, in workplaces, schools, even churches. You learned to watch every word, to trust no one outside your closest family. The stress took its toll. Alcoholism and suicide rates soared. By the 1980s, Estonians had become a minority in many cities. Russian was the lingua franca. Our customs and traditions were fading. It felt like we were losing our soul as a nation. But a flicker of hope remained. We'd gather in the forests to sing our patriotic songs, keeping the flame of independence alive. When Gorbachev's reforms began, we seized our chance. The Baltic Way in 1989 was electrifying. 2 million of us joining hands across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. For the first time, we could openly demand our freedom. The day we raised the Estonian flag again in 1991, I wept with joy. But the scars of those 51 years run deep. We lost so much, our demographics forever altered, our economy ransacked, a generation traumatized. Even now, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, thinking the KGB is at the door. We're rebuilding, reclaiming our identity. But I worry for the future. So many young people don't understand what we endured, and Russia still looms to the east, as threatening as ever. I fear history could repeat itself if we're not vigilant. Sometimes I walk the streets of Tallinn, and it all comes flooding back. The fear, the oppression, the silent resistance. I see ghosts on every corner. The Soviet occupation may be over, but its shadow still lingers. We survived, but at such a cost. I hope the world never forgets what happened here, how a peaceful nation can be swallowed up, its very essence nearly erased. We must never let it happen again. I never thought I'd find myself caught up in the superstitions and rituals of a small fishing town, but that's exactly what happened during my visit to Kardla last summer. It was supposed to be a relaxing seaside getaway, but instead I witnessed a community gripped by fear and desperation, resorting to ancient practices in an attempt to ward off what they believed was a terrible curse. I arrived in Kardla on a foggy Tuesday morning. The town had a quaint charm at first glance. Colorful fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, narrow cobblestone streets, weathered old buildings. But there was an undercurrent of tension I sensed right away. People hurried along with their heads down, casting furtive glances over their shoulders. Shopkeepers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously. At my small bed and breakfast, the owner Martha seemed jumpy and distracted as she showed me to my room. When I asked about local attractions or restaurants, she just shook her head and mumbled something about it not being safe to go out much these days. Confused, I pressed her for details, but she clammed up and hurried away. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk down to the docks to get a closer look at the fishing boats. The fog had lifted, but dark clouds were rolling in, giving everything an ominous cast. As I neared the water, I saw a group of grizzled fishermen huddled together, arguing in low voices. They fell silent and glared at me suspiciously as I passed. Just then, I heard a commotion coming from one of the boats. An older man was yelling and gesticulating wildly as he rifled through crates and barrels on deck. "It's got to be here somewhere," he shouted. "We can't go out again without it." The other fishermen rushed over, trying to calm him down. "Easy there, Joe. We'll find it. It's got to be here somewhere." Curiosity got the better of me, and I edged closer, straining to hear. The men were searching frantically for something called a seaward stone. Apparently, it was some kind of talisman they believed would protect them while out on the water. "We're all doomed if we don't find it," the agitated man moaned. "The curse will take us all." I must have made a sound of surprise because suddenly all eyes turned to me. The men's expressions hardened. "What are you doing here, stranger?" one of them growled. "This ain't no place for tourists right now." I stammered out an apology and quickly retreated, my mind reeling. What was going on in this town? What curse were they talking about? As I hurried back toward my B&B, the wind picked up and I felt the first drops of rain. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. I noticed people starting to close up shops and hurry inside, casting anxious looks at the sky. Back in my room, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen and heard. I pulled out my phone, hoping to find some news about recent events in Kardla. But to my frustration, I had no signal. The Wi-Fi wasn't working either. I was cut off. That evening, the storm hit in full force. Rain lashed against my window as the wind howled. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Around midnight, I heard chanting coming from outside. Peering through the rain-streaked glass, I saw a group of people gathered in the street below. They were dressed in dark robes, holding candles that guttered in the wind. An elderly woman stood in the center, reading from a massive old book. The others swayed and chanted in unison. My blood ran cold as I realized I was witnessing some kind of occult ritual. Part of me wanted to hide under the covers, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The chanting grew louder, building to a fevered pitch. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. I jumped back from the window with a yelp. When I looked again, the street was empty. Had I imagined the whole thing? The next morning dawned gray and gloomy. At breakfast, I tried to ask Martha about the storm and the strange events of the night before, but she avoided my questions, her hands shaking slightly as she poured my coffee. I decided to head into town, determined to get some answers. The streets were largely deserted, many businesses still shuttered. Those few people I passed averted their eyes and hurried by. Near the town square, I came across an odd sight. A group of women were tying bits of cloth and trinkets to the branches of an ancient-looking oak tree. They murmured softly as they worked, almost like a prayer. When I approached, one of the women hissed at me to stay back. "This is sacred ground," she said. "We're leaving offerings for the Hilma witches. It's our only hope now." Before I could ask what she meant, the others shooed me away, making signs to ward off evil. I backed off, my head spinning. Witches? Offerings? This was getting crazier by the minute. I wandered down toward the harbor, hoping to find a cafe or somewhere I could sit and collect my thoughts. As I neared the docks, I saw a crowd gathered. Drawing closer, I realized they were watching some kind of ceremony. Local officials in their naval-style uniforms stood on a platform. Before them was a table piled high with what looked like old trophies, medals, and other metallic objects. One by one, people from the crowd came forward to add items to the pile. An older man in an official-looking cap addressed the crowd. "With these offerings we honor the spirits of those lost at sea," he intoned solemnly. "May they find peace and spare our town from further tragedy." Then, to my shock, they began hurling the entire pile of objects into the harbor. The crowd watched in tense silence as the waters swallowed up decades' worth of nautical memorabilia. I must have gasped audibly because several people turned to glare at me. A woman nearby leaned in and whispered harshly, "It's to appease the drowned sailors. Their restless spirits have been plaguing us, taking our own to join them in the depths." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, taking your own?" I asked. Her eyes widened fearfully. "You mean you don't know? Where have you been? We've lost a dozen townspeople in the past month, vanished without a trace. Some were found later." Her voice broke. "Washed up on shore, but others just gone." I felt the blood drain from my face. Suddenly the terror gripping the town made a horrible kind of sense, but surely there had to be a rational explanation. Before I could ask more, there was a commotion from the docks. A fishing boat was pulling in, the crew shouting and waving frantically. As they tied up, I saw they were supporting a man who looked half drowned. "It's old Joe," someone in the crowd cried, "but he went missing days ago." They laid the man on the dock. He was pale and shivering, his eyes wild. As people crowded around, he began to babble incoherently. I caught phrases like "the depths" and "they're coming" before he passed out. The crowd erupted in terrified whispers. I heard people arguing about whether this was a sign the rituals were working or if things were about to get even worse. I'd seen enough. My heart pounding, I pushed my way through the crowd and ran back to the B&B. I had to get out of this town before I got swept up in the insanity. But when I got to my room and tried to call a taxi, my phone still had no signal. I asked Martha about buses or trains, but she just shook her head sadly. "Nothing's running," she said. "No one comes in or out of Cardla these days." That's when the true horror of my situation hit me. I was trapped here, in a town gripped by terror and teetering on the edge of madness. As night fell, the chanting started up again. This time it seemed to be coming from all over town. I huddled in my room, my mind racing. What was really going on here? Was there actually some kind of curse? Or was this all mass hysteria brought on by a string of tragic accidents? I dozed fitfully, plagued by nightmares of dark waters and grasping hands pulling me under. I awoke with a start sometime in the early hours, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I thought I heard whispering coming from inside the walls. But that was impossible, right? The next few days passed in a blur of dread and confusion. I alternated between hiding in my room and cautiously venturing out, trying to make sense of the madness around me. I saw more rituals and offerings, heard more whispered tales of horror. People were growing increasingly paranoid and desperate. I tried to stay rational, to look for logical explanations, but it was hard not to get caught up in the fear permeating every corner of Cardla. I found myself jumping at shadows, flinching at every sudden sound, and then, just as suddenly as it all began, it stopped. I woke up one morning to bright sunshine and the sound of normal activity in the streets. When I went downstairs, Martha greeted me with a cheerful smile, as if the past few days had never happened. People were going about their business, shops were open, fishing boats were heading out to sea. No one was chanting or leaving offerings or talking about curses. Bewildered, I tried to ask what had changed, but I was met with blank looks or nervous laughter. A few people insisted they had no idea what I was talking about. Others changed the subject quickly. It was like the entire town had collectively decided to pretend none of it had ever happened. I managed to book passage on the next ferry out of Cardla. As we pulled away from the harbor, I looked back at the town. It looked perfectly picturesque and normal in the morning light, but I knew I would never forget the terror and madness I had witnessed. To this day, I'm haunted by questions. What really happened in Cardla? Was it all just mass hysteria? Or was there something darker at work? I may never know the truth, but one thing's for certain. I'll never set foot in that town again. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. As a trail guide in the Appalachian Mountains, I'm used to dealing with all sorts of unexpected challenges, sudden weather changes, minor injuries, lost hikers. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last Tuesday. It started out as a routine solo patrol of one of our less traveled trails. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn, painting the forest in vibrant reds and golds. The air had that crisp October feel that I love. I was about 6 miles into my hike when I spotted something out of place up ahead, a crumpled form lying just off the trail. My heart started racing as I approached. At first I thought it might be a dead animal, but as I got closer, I realized with a jolt that it was a person. A man, probably in his 40s, sprawled face down and motionless. I rushed over and knelt beside him, my hands shaking as I felt for a pulse. To my immense relief, I found one, weak and thready, but there. He was alive, but clearly in bad shape, unconscious, pale, and cold to the touch. No obvious injuries that I could see, but who knows how long he'd been out here. "Hey, can you hear me?" I called out, gently shaking his shoulder. No response. I quickly took stock of the situation. We were deep in a remote part of the wilderness, at least 10 miles from the nearest ranger station. No cell service out here. The man needed medical attention ASAP, but there was no way for me to call for help. I knew I had a choice to make. I could try to set up camp and keep him stable while I hiked out alone to get help. But that would take hours, maybe a full day, and I wasn't sure he had that long. Or I could try to carry him out myself. Looking at his limp form, I wasn't even sure if I could lift him, let alone carry him for miles. I'm in good shape, but I'm not exactly built like a linebacker. Still, I knew I had to try. With a deep breath, I hoisted the unconscious man onto my back in a fireman's carry. His dead weight nearly toppled me over, but I managed to find my balance. And then, step by agonizing step, I started to walk. The first mile was the hardest. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I struggled up the steep, rocky trail. The man's arms and legs kept slipping, forcing me to continually readjust my grip. Sweat poured down my face despite the cool air. More than once I nearly lost my footing on the uneven ground, but I kept going, driven by a desperate need to get this stranger to safety. I tried not to think about how many miles lay ahead. Just focus on the next step, I told myself, one foot in front of the other. As I walked, I found myself talking to the unconscious man, though I'm not sure why. Maybe it was to distract myself from the burning in my muscles and lungs. Maybe it was to convince myself he was still alive. "Hang in there, buddy," I panted. "We're going to get you out of here. Just stay with me." The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly. Shadows lengthened as the afternoon wore on. I had to stop every half mile or so to catch my breath and readjust my grip. Each time, I anxiously checked to make sure the man was still breathing before hoisting him back up. After about 3 miles, I hit a wall. My legs were shaking uncontrollably, and spots were dancing in front of my eyes. I genuinely didn't think I could take another step. I lowered the man to the ground and collapsed beside him, gasping for air. As I lay there, feeling utterly defeated, a memory flashed through my mind. A story my grandfather used to tell me about his time as a medic in World War II. How he'd carried a wounded soldier for miles under enemy fire, running on nothing but adrenaline and sheer force of will. When someone's life is in your hands, he'd said, you find strength you never knew you had. Those words echoed in my head as I looked at the pale, still face of the man beside me, someone who would die out here alone if I gave up. With a groan, I staggered to my feet and lifted him once more. The next few miles passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. I fell into a mechanical rhythm. Lift foot, step, breathe, repeat. My world narrowed to the patch of ground directly in front of me. I lost all sense of time. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I spotted a familiar landmark through the trees, an old lightning-struck oak that I knew meant the ranger station was less than a mile away. A surge of desperate energy propelled me forward. Those last 1,000 yards were the longest of my life. My vision was tunneling, and my legs felt like they would give out any second. But finally, I stumbled into the clearing where the station stood. "Help!" I managed to croak out before my knees buckled. As I collapsed to the ground, still clinging to my unconscious passenger, I saw figures in uniforms running towards us. Then everything went black. I woke up sometime later in the medical bay of the ranger station. My whole body felt like one giant bruise. But as the fog cleared from my mind, I remembered why I was there and bolted upright. "The man, is he?" I started to ask the ranger beside me. "He's alive," she assured me. "You got him here just in time. The doctors say he had a severe allergic reaction to a bee sting. If you hadn't found him when you did," she trailed off, shaking her head in amazement. Relief washed over me, followed by a wave of emotion I couldn't quite name. I'd done it. Against all odds, I'd gotten him out. He was going to be okay. As I lay back down, utterly drained, the ranger continued, "I've got to say, what you did was incredible. Carrying a grown man for 7 miles through that terrain. I don't know how you managed it. I thought about my grandfather's words, about finding strength you never knew you had." "Neither do I admitted, "but I'm glad I did." In the days that followed, as I recovered from my ordeal, I learned more about the man I'd rescued. His name was David, an experienced hiker who'd had the misfortune of stumbling into a hidden bee's nest. He'd managed to use his EpiPen, but it wasn't enough to fully counteract the reaction. If I hadn't found him when I did, he likely would have died alone in those woods. David came to visit me in the hospital, his eyes brimming with tears as he tried to express his gratitude. But honestly, as crazy as it sounds, I felt grateful too. Grateful that I'd been there, that I'd found the strength to keep going when every fiber of my being wanted to give up. It's been a few months now, and I'm back to my regular guiding duties. But I don't think I'll ever forget that day. Sometimes when I'm on the trail, I'll pause and look out at the vast wilderness around me. And I'll think about the incredible reserves of strength we all have inside us. Strength we may never know about until we're pushed to our absolute limits. I went into those woods that day as just another trail guide doing my job. I came out knowing that when it really matters, I'm capable of so much more than I ever imagined. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. My name's Alex, and my best friend Chris Fowler vanished without a trace while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail back in 2016. We'd been friends since college, bonded over our love of the outdoors. Chris was an experienced hiker, always careful and well-prepared. When he told me he was planning to tackle the PCT, I was excited for him. It was a dream he'd had for years. The day Chris set out, I drove him to the trailhead. We snapped a quick selfie, all smiles and excitement. "See you in a few months," he said as he shouldered his pack. If only I'd known those would be the last words I'd hear from him. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Chris would check in every few days, post photos on Instagram, update his blog. He was having the time of his life out there on the trail. His last post was a stunning sunset photo captioned, "Day 37, loving every minute of this journey." Then, nothing. At first, I wasn't too worried. It wasn't unusual for hikers to go off-grid for a bit in more remote sections. But as days turned into a week, then two, with no word from Chris, a gnawing anxiety took hold. I reached out to other PCT hikers online, asking if anyone had seen him. No one had any recent sightings. I contacted the trail associations, park rangers, anyone who might have information. Nothing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I took time off work and flew out to California to join the search efforts that were just getting underway. Those first few days are a blur of hiking, calling Chris's name until my voice was hoarse, scrutinizing every piece of ground for any sign of him. As we pushed further along the trail, following Chris's planned route, an eerie feeling settled over me. The forest seemed to close in, shadows deeper and more menacing than they should have been in broad daylight. More than once I could have sworn I heard someone calling my name, only to turn and find nothing but empty woods. On the fourth day of searching, we came across an abandoned campsite that matched the description of Chris's gear. My heart leapt. Finally, a clue. But as we approached, that hope curdled into dread. The tent was slashed open, contents strewn about as if someone had left in a panic. Chris's backpack lay nearby, still containing his wallet, phone, and other essentials. Who would abandon all their gear like this? As we combed the area for any sign of Chris, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Carved into a nearby tree trunk was a crude stick figure, arms outstretched. It looked almost childlike, but something about it filled me with inexplicable terror. I blinked, and for a split second, I could have sworn the figure moved. The rangers dismissed it as likely unrelated graffiti, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected to Chris's disappearance. That night in my tent, I tossed and turned, plagued by vivid nightmares of Chris lost and alone in a dark, twisted version of the forest. The next morning, I woke to find strange symbols drawn in the dirt outside my tent. They looked like the same stick figure from the tree, but more elaborate, forming a circle around where I'd slept. The other searchers swore they hadn't seen or heard anyone approach in the night. As the days wore on with no further signs of Chris, the search efforts began to wind down. But I couldn't let it go. I stayed out there for weeks, pushing myself to the brink of exhaustion. I don't know how many miles I covered, how many ravines I climbed down into, how many times I called Chris's name until my throat was raw. One evening, as dusk was falling, I decided to make one last sweep of the area near where we'd found Chris's campsite. The fading light cast long shadows, making the forest feel more sinister with each passing minute. As I picked my way through a particularly dense patch of underbrush, my foot caught on something. I looked down, expecting to see a root or fallen branch. Instead, I found myself staring at a tattered piece of fabric partially buried in the leaves. My hands shaking, I brushed away the debris. It was Chris's favorite flannel shirt, the one he'd been wearing in that last Instagram post. My first thought was relief. Finally, a real clue. But as I pulled the shirt free, that relief turned to horror. The fabric was stiff with what I prayed wasn't dried blood, and there were long tears in it, as if from claws or knife slashes. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What the hell had happened to Chris? As if in answer, a twig snapped somewhere behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but saw only deepening shadows between the trees. Then another snap, closer this time. Panic overtook me. I ran, Chris's ruined shirt still clutched in my hand. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I could have sworn I heard footsteps pursuing me, but every time I glanced back, there was nothing there. I don't know how long I ran, or how I found my way back to the campsite. I burst out of the tree line, gasping for air, and nearly collided with one of the park rangers. She took one look at my wild eyes and the blood-stained shirt in my hands and immediately called for backup. The discovery of the shirt sparked a renewed search effort, but it was like the forest itself was conspiring against us. Dense fog rolled in, limiting visibility to just a few feet. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably. More than one searcher reported hearing whispering voices or catching glimpses of movement just at the edge of their vision. After 3 more fruitless days, the search was called off for good. The official report cited treacherous terrain and possible animal attack, but those of us who were out there knew it was something more, something we couldn't explain. I've been back to that stretch of the PCT several times since then, driven by a desperate need for answers. Each time I've experienced things I can't rationalize. Strange lights moving through the trees at night, my compass spinning wildly, that same stick figure appearing carved into trees or drawn in the dirt no matter how far I hike. It's been years now, and Chris's disappearance remains a complete mystery. No body, no definitive evidence of what happened to him. Just a ruined campsite, a blood-stained shirt, and the oppressive sense that something in those woods didn't want us to find him. I still have nightmares about those weeks spent searching. In them, I'm wandering through an endless, twisted version of the forest. I can hear Chris calling for help, always just out of sight. But no matter how fast I run or how loud I call back, I can never reach him. I don't know if I'll ever have closure or understand what really happened out there. All I know is that something took my best friend, and the forests of the Pacific Crest Trail will never feel safe to me again. If you're out there, Chris, I'm sorry I couldn't find you. And to anyone planning to hike the PCT, be careful. There are things in those woods that can't be explained, and some trails are better left untraveled. I'd been planning this solo backpacking trip for months, eager to get away from the bustle of city life and reconnect with nature. As a freelance journalist, I was always chasing the next story, but this trip was supposed to be a chance to unplug and recharge. If only I'd known what was waiting for me in those quiet woods. The first few days were exactly what I needed. Peaceful hikes through pine forests, nights spent stargazing by the campfire. But on that 4th morning, everything changed. I woke up at dawn as usual, ready to break camp and hit the trail. As I was packing up my tent, I heard rustling in the brush nearby. I froze, wondering if it was a bear or other wildlife. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. No response. The rustling grew closer. My heart started racing as I realized it was definitely footsteps, not an animal. Before I could react, a disheveled man burst into my campsite. He was wild-eyed and filthy, clothes torn and matted with dirt and leaves. "What are you doing here?" he snarled, glaring at me with undisguised hostility. I raised my hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "Just camping, man. I don't want any trouble." "This is my spot," he growled, taking a menacing step towards me. "You need to leave, now." I nodded quickly, not wanting to escalate the situation. "Okay, no problem. I'll pack up and go." As I turned to grab my backpack, I heard him muttering to himself, becoming more agitated. I tried to focus on gathering my gear as fast as possible, but I could feel his eyes boring into my back. My hands were shaking as I stuffed my sleeping bag into its compression sack. Suddenly, he lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. "You're lying!" he screamed. "You're here to steal my food, my shelter!" I tried to push him off, but he was surprisingly strong for how gaunt he looked. We grappled on the forest floor, rolling through dirt and pine needles. I managed to land a solid punch to his jaw, dazing him for a moment. I scrambled to my feet, ready to run, when I saw the glint of metal in his hand. Time seemed to slow down as I watched him raise the knife. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a tree root. As I fell, I felt a searing pain in my abdomen. Looking down in shock, I saw the handle of the knife protruding from my stomach, blood already soaking through my shirt. The man's face contorted with rage as he yanked the knife out and stabbed again and again. I tried to cry out, to beg him to stop, but only a wet gurgle escaped my lips. My vision started to blur as he continued his frenzied attack. The last thing I remember is staring up at the canopy of trees above, sunlight filtering through the leaves as everything faded to black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, the man was gone. I was lying in a pool of my own blood, my body racked with pain. I tried to move, to crawl towards my backpack where I had a satellite phone, but my limbs wouldn't cooperate. I could only lie there, drifting in and out of consciousness as the sun tracked across the sky. As evening approached, I heard voices in the distance. Hikers, I realized with a surge of hope. I tried to call out, but could only manage a weak moan. By some miracle, they heard me. I'll never forget the looks of horror on their faces as they stumbled upon my campsite. The next few days were a blur of medevac helicopters, emergency surgeries, and police interviews. I learned that my attacker was a local drifter named Thomas Blake, with a history of mental illness and petty crimes. He was caught a few days later, still wearing my bloody clothes and rambling about protecting his territory from invaders. The physical wounds eventually healed, but the emotional scars run deep. I still have nightmares about those crazed eyes, that glinting knife. I haven't been able to go camping since, or even for long hikes in secluded areas. The outdoors that I once loved now fills me with paralyzing fear. Blake was sentenced to 25 years in prison after confessing to the attack. But knowing he's locked up doesn't bring me much comfort. I'm left grappling with the randomness of it all, how a simple camping trip turned into a fight for my life in an instant. I know I'm lucky to have survived, but some days it feels like a part of me died in those woods. I share this story as a warning to other solo hikers and campers. We like to think we're safe in nature, away from the dangers of the city. But sometimes the most dangerous predators are the human ones. Always be aware of your surroundings, trust your instincts, and have a way to call for help. You never know when a dream vacation can turn into a nightmare. The hardest part is the lingering questions. Why me? What if I'd chosen a different campsite or left a day earlier? Could I have done something differently to defuse the situation? I know dwelling on the what-ifs isn't healthy, but I can't help it. Therapy has helped somewhat, but I still struggle with hypervigilance and panic attacks. Crowded spaces make me anxious, but so do quiet, isolated areas. I've had to change careers, as my passion for travel writing is now tainted by trauma. Some days are better than others, but I don't think I'll ever fully be the carefree person I was before that day in Gallatin. I'm sharing this not for pity or attention, but in hopes that my experience can help others stay safe. Don't let fear keep you from enjoying the outdoors, but do be prepared and cautious. And if you ever get that gut feeling that something isn't right, listen to it. It just might save your life. Sometimes I wonder what became of Thomas Blake. Is he remorseful for what he did, or does he still believe he was defending his territory? What drove him to that point of desperation and violence? I've considered reaching out, trying to understand, but I'm not sure I'm ready to face him again, even from behind prison glass. As I sit here typing this, I can almost smell the pine needles and campfire smoke. For a moment, I'm transported back to those peaceful days before the attack. I miss that sense of freedom and connection with nature. Maybe someday I'll find the courage to venture into the wilderness again. But for now, the memory of that blood-soaked clearing in Gallatin haunts my dreams, a stark reminder of how quickly paradise can become a prison. To those reading this, please be safe out there. Enjoy the beauty of nature, but never forget that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. And to my fellow survivors of random acts of violence, you're not alone. Healing is a long and winding trail, but we'll get there eventually, one step at a time. The streets were mostly empty as I ran, my breath forming little clouds in the cold air. Streetlights cast an eerie glow, creating long shadows that seemed to reach out across the pavement. As I approached the park, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just on edge from watching too many horror films lately. I was about halfway around the park when I noticed a small figure standing near the old cemetery gates. At first, I thought it must be a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I realized it was a young girl, probably 9 or 10 years old. She was wearing only a thin white dress, completely inappropriate for the freezing weather. My first thought was that she must be freezing. I slowed to a stop, catching my breath as I called out, "Hey there, are you all right? Where are your parents?" The girl turned to look at me and I felt my blood run cold. Her face was deathly pale, almost glowing in the dim light. Her eyes were wide and frightened as she said in a small voice, "Please, I need help." Every instinct told me to turn and run, but I couldn't just leave a child alone in the dark. I took a few hesitant steps closer. "What's wrong? Are you lost? I can call the police to help find your family." At the mention of police, the girl's demeanor changed instantly. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she let out an inhuman shriek that made me stumble backwards. Before I could react, she turned and ran into the cemetery, disappearing into the darkness between the gravestones. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to follow her, to make sure she was okay, but a deeper instinct held me back. The whole encounter felt wrong, like I'd stepped into another reality for a moment. I turned and sprinted back towards my flat, not slowing down until I was safely inside with the door locked behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled under my blankets, unable to shake the image of that girl's face from my mind. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just a runaway playing a prank. Maybe I'd been more tired than I realized, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. I started researching the history of the area, looking for any stories that might explain what I'd encountered. I learned that the cemetery dated back to the 1800s, and there were local legends about spirits of children who died in a cholera outbreak haunting the grounds. One account from the 1950s described a girl in a white dress luring people into the cemetery at night, never to be seen again. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to following that girl into the graveyard. What would have happened if I had? The thought made me shudder. I avoided that part of town for weeks afterwards, too spooked to go anywhere near the park or cemetery. When I finally worked up the courage to jog that route again, I made sure it was in broad daylight. As I passed the cemetery gates, I felt a chill run down my spine. For a split second, I thought I saw a small figure in white watching me from between the headstones. I blinked, and it was gone. To this day, I'm not sure what exactly I encountered that night. Was it truly a ghost, or something even more sinister? All I know is that it shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. I still get goosebumps every time I think about that little girl and her haunting plea for help. Sometimes I wonder if she's still out there, waiting by those gates for someone else to come along. And I wonder how many others may have encountered her over the years, perhaps with far worse outcomes than my brief and chilling encounter. I've tried talking to a few friends about what happened, but most just laugh it off or tell me I must have been seeing things. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was all in my head. But in my heart, I know what I saw was real. That girl, whatever she was, didn't belong in our world, and I count myself lucky that I didn't end up crossing over into hers. Since that night, I've become hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on edge when I'm out after dark. Every unexpected movement or shadow makes me jump. I find myself avoiding cemeteries and old buildings, worried about what might be lurking just out of sight. It's like that encounter opened my eyes to a hidden world that exists alongside our own, full of things we can't explain or understand. I've tried to move on with my life, to forget about what happened. But every so often, especially on cold autumn nights, I find myself thinking about that girl. I wonder if she's still out there, waiting by those gates. And I wonder how many others may have encountered her over the years, perhaps with far worse outcomes than my brief and chilling encounter. I know this all probably sounds crazy. Before it happened to me, I would have been skeptical too. But that night changed everything for me. It forced me to confront the fact that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows just beyond our understanding. And sometimes, if we're not careful, those things can reach out and touch our lives in ways we never imagined possible. I still live in Lancaster, finishing up my degree, but I've changed my jogging route permanently. No matter how much time passes, I don't think I'll ever be able to run past that cemetery again without feeling those eyes on me, without hearing that unearthly shriek echoing in my mind. Some experiences leave a mark on you that never fully fades, and my encounter with the ghost girl of Lancaster is one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. For those reading this who might be skeptical, I understand. I was once like you, but I urge you to keep an open mind and be cautious, especially in old places with dark histories. You never know when you might stumble upon something that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world. And trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let curiosity override your sense of self-preservation. I often wonder what would have happened if I'd followed that girl into the cemetery that night. Would I have disappeared without a trace, becoming just another mysterious missing persons case? Or would I have seen things that would have shattered my sanity completely? In a way, I'm grateful that my encounter was as brief as it was. It was enough to open my eyes to the unknown, but not enough to drag me fully into that frightening other world. As I finish writing this, the sun is setting outside my window. The shadows are growing longer, and I can't help but glance nervously at the darkened corners of my room. That's what this experience has done to me, made me forever wary of the dark and what might be hiding in it. So if you're out there reading this, Be careful. And if you're ever in Lancaster and see a little girl in a white dress standing by the cemetery gates, run. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. Some calls for help are better left unanswered. I was sitting in the bleachers, half watching the game and half scrolling through my phone, when I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I looked up, and my heart skipped a beat. It was Marco Rivera, the star player of our school team. He was tall, muscular, with perfect hair and a dazzling smile. Basically, every girl's dream guy. "Hey, can I talk to you for a sec?" he asked, flashing that million-dollar grin. I nodded, too stunned to speak. Marco motioned for me to follow him out to the hallway. My mind was racing. Why would he want to talk to me? We'd never even spoken before. Once we were alone in the hallway, Marco's demeanor changed. The charming smile vanished, replaced by a look of desperation. "Listen, I need your help with something. It's really important," he said in a low, urgent voice. Okay. What is it?" I replied hesitantly. Marco glanced around nervously before continuing. "I have this thing I need to get rid of. It's in my car. I was hoping you could help me dispose of it." Warning bells started going off in my head. This sounded sketchy as hell. But before I could respond, Marco grabbed my arm. "Please," he pleaded. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't crucial. I could get in serious trouble if anyone finds out." I should have said no. I should have walked away right then and there. But something in Marco's eyes made me pause. He looked genuinely frightened. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. Plus, this was Marco Rivera, the most popular guy in school. How could I turn him down? "Okay," I said finally. "What do you need me to do?" Relief washed over Marco's face. "Thank you so much. Come on, I'll show you." He led me out to the parking lot where his shiny red Mustang was parked. Marco popped the trunk and pulled out a gym bag. "It's in here," he said, unzipping the bag just enough for me to catch a glimpse of something metal inside. My blood ran cold as I realized what it was. A gun. "Marco, what the hell?" I hissed, backing away. "Is that a gun? Why do you have that?" "Shh! Keep your voice down." Marco looked around frantically. "Look, I can't explain everything right now, but I need to get rid of this ASAP. Don't you said your dad works at that scrap metal yard?" I nodded, still in shock. My dad was the manager at a local recycling plant that had a huge industrial shredder for scrap metal. "Perfect. Can you take this there and run it through the shredder? No one will ever find it." My mind was reeling. This was insane. I was about to refuse when Marco grabbed my hands. "Please," he begged. "I'm begging you. My whole future is on the line here. I'll do anything to repay you, I swear." I don't know what possessed me in that moment. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or Marco's pleading eyes, or just sheer stupidity. But I heard myself say, "Okay, I'll do it." Marco hugged me tightly. "Thank you so much. You're saving my life, seriously." He shoved the gym bag into my arms and ushered me into the passenger seat of his car. As we peeled out of the parking lot, my heart was pounding. What the hell had I gotten myself into? The drive to the scrapyard was tense and silent. I clutched the bag to my chest, hyper-aware of its contents. Marco kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if expecting someone to be following us. When we arrived, the place was deserted. It was well past closing time on a Friday night. Marco pulled up to the back gate. "Okay, you know where the shredder is, right?" he asked. I nodded. I'd been here plenty of times with my dad. "All right, I'll wait here and keep watch. Just run in, toss the bag in the shredder, and come right back. And remember, Don't look inside the bag. The less you know, the better. With shaking hands, I got out of the car and made my way to the gate. Using the key my dad had given me for emergencies, I let myself in and hurried to the shredder. The massive machine loomed before me, its metal teeth gleaming in the dim light. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do hitting me, but it was too late to back out now. Taking a deep breath, I opened the bag just enough to pull out the gun. It was heavier than I expected, cold and alien in my hands. Without letting myself think about it any further, I tossed it into the shredder's gaping maw. The screech of metal on metal made me jump. In seconds, the gun was reduced to unrecognizable bits of scrap. It was done. I practically ran back to Marco's car, my heart racing. He was visibly relieved when I slid into the passenger seat. "It's done," I said shakily. "Thank you," Marco replied, squeezing my hand. "You have no idea how much this means to me." The drive back was just as tense and quiet. My mind was spinning with questions, but I was too afraid to ask any of them. When Marco dropped me off at home, he thanked me again profusely. "Remember," he said as I got out, "this never happened, okay? You were never here tonight." I nodded numbly and watched him drive away, still not fully processing what had just occurred. The next few days were a blur. I was constantly on edge, jumping at every sound and paranoid that someone would find out what I'd done. Marco avoided me at school, which only added to my anxiety. It wasn't until the following Wednesday that I found out the truth. I was in homeroom when the principal came on the intercom with a shocking announcement. "Attention students and staff. I regret to inform you that one of our own, Sofia Rivera, was arrested last night in connection with a violent robbery." Sofia Rivera, Marco's older sister. My blood ran cold as the principal continued. "Ms. Rivera is accused of assaulting an elderly man and stealing his wallet. The victim is in critical condition. If anyone has any information related to this crime, please come forward." The classroom erupted in shocked whispers, but I barely heard them over the roaring in my ears. It all made sense now. The gun, Marco's desperation, the need to destroy evidence. I'd helped cover up a violent crime. I was an accessory. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The rest of the day passed in a haze of panic and guilt. I kept expecting the police to burst in and arrest me at any moment. When the final bell rang, I practically ran out of the building. But Marco was waiting for me in the parking lot. He pulled me aside, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said in a low voice. I let him lead me to a secluded spot behind the gym. As soon as we were alone, I exploded. "What the hell, Marco? Your sister assaulted someone, and you made me destroy evidence?" "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't know what else to do. Sophia came to me that night, freaking out, said she'd done something terrible. I was just trying to protect her." "By dragging me into it?" I hissed. "Do you have any idea how much trouble I could be in?" "No one will ever know," Marco insisted. "The gun is gone. There's no evidence linking you to anything. As long as we both keep our mouths shut, it'll be fine." But it wasn't fine. Not even close. In the weeks that followed, I was a nervous wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus in class. Every time I saw a police car, my heart would race. The guilt was eating me alive. An innocent man was in the hospital because I'd helped destroy evidence that could have put his attacker away. How could I live with myself? I wanted to come clean, to tell someone what I'd done. But fear held me back. I was in too deep now. If I confessed, I'd go down too. My whole future would be ruined. So I stayed silent, carrying the weight of my secret like a boulder on my chest. Marco and I avoided each other completely. Whenever I saw him in the halls, he'd look away quickly. As the weeks turned to months, the investigation into the robbery seemed to stall. There were no new leads, no arrests beyond Sophia. Gradually, life at school returned to normal. But for me, nothing would ever be normal again. Even now, months later, I'm still haunted by what happened that night. Every time I see my dad's work keys, I'm reminded of what I did. The guilt and fear are constant companions. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself. All I can do is try to be a better person going forward, and hope that someday I'll find a way to make amends for the terrible mistake I made. But one thing's for sure, I'll never again let myself be manipulated into doing something I know is wrong, no matter who's asking. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed, and the weight of that knowledge is something I'll have to carry for the rest of my life. I remember wandering through the festival grounds as the sun began to set, taking in all the sights and sounds. My parents were busy at our family's fortune-telling booth, so I had some time to explore on my own. The lanterns were just starting to flicker to life, casting a warm glow over everything. I felt so alive, so connected to my heritage. As I made my way past a row of food stalls, I noticed a group of young men watching me. There were about 5 of them, probably in their early 20s. At first I didn't think much of it. There were plenty of people milling about. But then I realized they seemed to be following me, always staying a short distance behind. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm evening air. I quickened my pace, weaving through the crowds, hoping to lose them. But when I glanced back, they were still there. My heart started racing. I contemplated going back to my parents' booth, but it was on the other side of the fairgrounds. I didn't want to lead these men there if they really were following me. Instead, I ducked into a quieter area behind some tents, thinking I could circle back around to the main festival area. Big mistake. As soon as I was out of sight of the crowds, I felt a rough hand grab my arm. I whirled around to see one of the men, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "Where do you think you're going, pretty one?" he sneered, his breath reeking of alcohol. I tried to wrench my arm away, but his grip was like iron. The other men quickly surrounded me, cutting off any escape route. Panic flooded through me as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just harassment. They meant to take me. "Let me go," I shouted, hoping someone would hear. But the sounds of the festival drowned out my voice. One of the other men laughed. "Don't worry, we'll take good care of you. You'll make a fine bride for one of us." Bride? The word sent ice through my veins. I'd heard whispers of forced marriages in some of the more traditional Romani communities, but I never thought it could happen to me. Not here, not now. As they started to drag me further into the shadows, survival instinct kicked in. I may have been young, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I stomped hard on the foot of the man gripping my arm. He yelped in pain and loosened his hold just enough for me to wrench free. But I wasn't out of danger yet. Another man lunged for me, grabbing a fistful of my long hair. Pain lanced through my scalp as he yanked me backwards. Desperately, I swung my elbow back as hard as I could, feeling it connect with something soft. A grunt of pain told me I'd hit my mark. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. Adrenaline surged through me as I fought with everything I had. I kicked, scratched, and struck out at any part of them I could reach. I may have been outnumbered, but I had the strength of sheer terror on my side. One of them managed to get his arms around me from behind, trying to lift me off my feet. I threw my head back, feeling the crunch as my skull connected with his nose. He dropped me with a howl of pain. I knew I couldn't keep this up for long. They were bigger and stronger than me. I had to get away now, or I might not get another chance. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, not daring to look back. I could hear them shouting and the pounding of feet behind me. Tears streamed down my face as I sprinted through the maze of tents and caravans. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I didn't slow down. I darted around a corner and found myself back in the main festival area. Without hesitating, I plunged into the crowd, desperately pushing my way through. "Help!" I tried to shout, but it came out as more of a strangled gasp. No one seemed to notice my distress in the sea of revelers. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw the men still in pursuit, shoving people aside as they searched for me. Panic gave me a fresh burst of speed. I had to find my parents. Everything was a blur of lights and colors as I ran. The cheerful music now seemed mocking, a stark contrast to the terror I felt. How could everyone be celebrating when this nightmare was happening? Finally, I spotted our family's booth. My mother was just stepping out, her brow furrowed with concern. She must have been looking for me. "Mama!" I cried out, flinging myself into her arms. She stumbled back, startled by my sudden appearance. "What's wrong? What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. I couldn't speak. I could only sob and point in the direction I'd come from. My father emerged from the booth, his face darkening as he took in my disheveled state. Through my tears, I saw the group of men appear at the edge of the crowd. They stopped short when they saw me with my parents, glaring for a moment before melting away into the night. It took a while for me to calm down enough to explain what had happened. My parents were horrified. My father wanted to go after the men, but I begged him not to leave us. I was terrified they might come back. We left the festival immediately. I huddled in the back of our caravan as we drove away, jumping at every sound. The rest of the night passed in a blur of police reports and comforting words from my family. But nothing could erase the memory of those terrifying moments. It's been years since that night, but the trauma still lingers. I've never been able to enjoy festivals the same way. The sights and sounds that once brought me joy now fill me with anxiety. I'm always looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those leering faces again. I know I was lucky. I managed to escape before things got even worse. But the experience shattered my sense of security within my own community. It opened my eyes to a darker side of our culture that I'd been sheltered from. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been able to fight them off. Would anyone have come to my rescue? Would I have become another statistic, another young girl forced into a life she didn't choose? I'm sharing this story now as a warning to others. No matter where you are, even in places where you think you're safe, always be aware of your surroundings. Trust your instincts, and most importantly, never be afraid to fight back. That night changed me forever, but I refuse to let it define me. I'm more than a victim. I'm a survivor. And if by sharing my story I can help even one other person avoid a similar fate, then reliving this nightmare will have been worth it. I'd only been living in Berlin for a few months at that point. My German was still pretty rough, but I was getting by. The city had a way of making you feel invincible, especially in those early morning hours when the streets were quiet, and it felt like the whole place belonged to you. As I stepped out of my apartment building, the cool night air hit my face. It was early autumn, and there was a slight chill in the breeze. I zipped up my jacket and started walking, my footsteps echoing off the buildings. The streetlights cast long shadows, and I could hear the faint bass of some distant club still going strong. I was about halfway to the spatty when I heard voices behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably just some other night owls heading home from a party. But then I noticed the voices were getting closer and fast. My heart rate picked up a bit, but I told myself not to be paranoid. This was Berlin, after all. I'd always felt safe here. Suddenly, a group of men appeared in front of me, seemingly out of nowhere. There were 5 of them, all dressed in dark clothes. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head, stepped forward. "Polizei," he said, flashing something that looked like a badge. "We need to see your identification." My stomach dropped. Something didn't feel right. Their body language was all wrong, too aggressive, too tense. And why would the police be stopping random people at 2 a.m.? I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied in my broken German. "I'm sorry, I don't have my ID with me. I just stepped out to buy cigarettes." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's a problem. You're required to carry identification at all times. We're going to have to take you in for questioning." My mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. I knew enough about Berlin to know that the police didn't operate like this. These guys were definitely not cops, and I was in serious trouble. That's when a crazy idea hit me. It was so absurd, it just might work. Without thinking too much about it, I decided to go for it. I straightened up, puffed out my chest a bit, and started speaking in the worst, most stereotypical Russian accent I could muster. "Ah, comrades," I boomed, trying to channel every cheesy Russian character I'd ever seen in movies. "Why you not say so earlier? I thought you were criminals." The men looked at each other, clearly thrown off by this sudden change. I pressed on, diving deeper into the character. "I am Dmitri, here on business from Moscow. Very important man back home, you understand? Now, why don't we forget about silly papers and have drink instead, yes?" I could see the confusion on their faces. This clearly wasn't how they expected things to go. The leader, the one who had first approached me, seemed particularly unsure. I knew I had to keep pushing. Come, I said, gesturing towards the spatty that was now visible down the street. "First round on Dmitri. We drink to new friends in Berlin." I started walking towards the store, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. To my amazement, they followed. I could hear them muttering to each other in German, trying to figure out what to do. As we entered the brightly lit store, I nodded to the bored-looking clerk behind the counter. In my peripheral vision, I could see the group hanging back near the door, still unsure. I grabbed a 6-pack of beer from the cooler, making sure to choose a cheap German brand. "Ah, good German beer," I exclaimed loudly. "Much better than vodka, yes?" I approached the counter and paid for the beer, making sure to fumble with the euros a bit, as if I wasn't used to the currency. Then I turned and held out the 6-pack to the group. "Here, my new friends, enjoy. Dmitri must go now. Very important meeting in morning. But we drink together next time, yes?" The leader of the group reached out and took the beer, almost mechanically. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to make sense of the situation. "Das vidanya," I called out as I left the store, forcing myself to walk at a normal pace, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. I half expected to hear footsteps behind me, to feel a hand grab my shoulder at any moment. But nothing happened. I walked all the way back to my apartment building without looking back once. It wasn't until I was safely inside, door locked behind me, that I allowed myself to breathe. My legs were shaking so badly I had to sit down on the floor. What the hell had just happened? As the adrenaline started to wear off, The reality of the situation hit me. I had just narrowly escaped what was almost certainly a robbery, maybe worse, and I had done it by pretending to be a stereotypical Russian businessman. It was so ridiculous I almost laughed, but the fear was still too fresh. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, jumping at every sound outside my window. When morning finally came, I half convinced myself it had all been some weird dream. But the memory was too vivid, too real. In the days that followed, I debated whether to report the incident to the police. But what would I say? That I scared off a group of fake cops by pretending to be Russian? It sounded insane even to me. I never saw those men again, but for weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I left my apartment. I started varying my routes, avoiding going out late at night. I even considered moving to a different neighborhood. It's been years now, and I still can't fully explain what happened that night. Was it just dumb luck? Did they believe my ridiculous act, or were they just too confused to react? I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that night changed me. It shattered my sense of invincibility, made me realize how quickly things can go wrong. But it also showed me that sometimes the most unexpected solution can save you. I still live in Berlin, and I still love this city. But now, when I walk its streets at night, I'm always a little more alert, a little more cautious. And sometimes, when I pass a spatty late at night, I can't help but smile and think about the night I became Dmitri, the Russian businessman who just wanted to share a beer with his new police friends. It's a story I've rarely shared, partly because it's so unbelievable, and partly because reliving it still gives me chills. But it's a reminder that in this big, sometimes scary world, our wits might be our best defense. And sometimes, the most absurd plan might just be crazy enough to work. It was early September when my landlord told me a new tenant would be moving in. I was excited at first. My last roommate had graduated and moved out, leaving me alone in the 2-bedroom apartment. The thought of having someone to split chores and bills with again was a relief. The day my new roommate arrived, I was in class. When I got home that evening, I found a petite Japanese girl unpacking in the other bedroom. She introduced herself as Yuki and explained that she was an exchange student. Her English wasn't great, but she seemed nice enough. I helped her settle in and showed her around the apartment. Things were normal at first. We'd pass each other in the hallway or kitchen and exchange polite greetings. Yuki was quiet and kept to herself, which suited me fine since I had a heavy course load that semester. But after about a week, I started noticing oddities. It began with little things. I'd be studying at my desk and get the sense that someone was watching me. When I'd look up, I'd catch a glimpse of Yuki quickly ducking away from her bedroom door. Or I'd be in the kitchen making dinner, and she'd silently appear in the doorway, just staring at me without saying anything. I tried to brush it off as cultural differences or maybe just social awkwardness. But as the days went on, Yuki's behavior became more and more unsettling. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I was walking back to my room, I noticed Yuki's door was wide open. She was standing in the middle of her room, completely still, facing my bedroom. When she saw me, she didn't react at all, just kept staring with this blank expression. I hurried back to my room and locked the door, my heart racing. After that, I started locking my bedroom door every night. but I'd often wake up to the sound of the doorknob jiggling, like someone was trying to get in. When I'd call out asking who was there was never any response. During the day, Yuki would follow me around the apartment. If I was in the living room watching TV, she'd sit on the other end of the couch, eyes fixed on me instead of the screen. When I'd get up to go to another room, she'd trail behind me at a distance. It was like living with a silent, creepy shadow. The balcony became my safe haven. I'd go out there to study or just to get away from Yuki's constant staring. But even that didn't last. One day, I glanced up from my textbook to see Yuki pressed against her bedroom window, watching me intently. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, even when I was outside. I tried talking to Yuki about personal space and boundaries, but she'd just smile and nod without saying anything. I couldn't tell if she truly didn't understand or if she was deliberately ignoring me. Things came to a head about 3 weeks after Yuki moved in. I had a big exam coming up and had been studying late into the night. Around 2 a.m., I decided to grab a snack from the kitchen. As I walked down the dark hallway, I saw a figure standing at the end, perfectly still. My blood ran cold as I realized it was Yuki, just standing there in the darkness, staring at me. I called out to her, asking what she was doing. No response. I took a step closer, and she took a step back, maintaining the distance between us. This continued until she backed into the living room. I fumbled for the light switch, my hands shaking. When I finally got the lights on, Yuki was gone. I searched the whole apartment, but there was no sign of her. Her bedroom door was locked. Thoroughly freaked out, I called my landlord the next morning and explained the situation. He agreed to come by that afternoon to check things out. But when he arrived and we entered Yuki's room, we found it completely empty. All of her belongings were gone, the bed was made, and there was no trace that anyone had been living there at all. The landlord was baffled. He said he had no record of Yuki moving out or turning in her keys. We checked the security cameras in the building's lobby, but there was no footage of her leaving. It was like she had vanished into thin air. In the days that followed, I scoured social media and even contacted the university's international student office, trying to find any information about Yuki. But it was as if she had never existed. No one else in the building remembered seeing her. I began to question my own sanity. Had I imagined the whole thing? It's been months now, and I still don't have any answers. I've moved to a new apartment since then, unable to shake the creepy feeling in my old place. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, half expecting to see Yuki standing in my room, silently watching me. I don't know who or what Yuki really was, or what she wanted from me. Was she a ghost? A figment of my imagination? Some kind of supernatural entity? I'll probably never know. But one thing's for sure. I'll never forget those weeks of living with the mysterious, obsessive girl who seemed to fade away like a bad dream. Still remember that day, like it was yesterday. The day everything changed. I was 16, a junior in high school, and thought I had it all figured out. For the past 6 months, I'd been selling weed and pills to my classmates, making serious cash for a kid my age. It started small, just hooking up a few friends here and there. But word spread fast, and soon I had a steady stream of customers hitting me up between classes and after school. My supplier was my Aunt Trisha's boyfriend, Rick. He was this sketchy dude in his 30s who always gave me the creeps, but he had good product and didn't ask questions. I'd pick up from him once a week, usually on Sundays when my parents were at church. At first I was nervous, but the money was too good to pass up. I was pulling in $3,000 a month easy, way more than any of my friends with their crappy part-time jobs. I got cocky, started flashing cash, buying designer clothes, the newest iPhone. My parents bought my BS story about making bank from my web design business. In reality, I was the go-to dealer for half the school. It was a rush, feeling like the big shot everyone wanted to know. That Tuesday started like any other. I woke up late, threw on some clothes, and rushed to make it to first period. As I was speed-walking down the hall, my phone buzzed. A text from Jake, one of my regular customers. "Yo, can I grab a 20 sack after school?" I texted back, "For sure. Meet behind the gym." Business as usual. The rest of the day dragged by in a blur of boring classes and whispered deals in the bathroom between periods. By last bell, I was ready to head home and chill. I swung by the gym to meet Jake, did the handoff, then started walking to my car in the senior lot. The parking lot was mostly empty by that point. Just a few cars left belonging to kids at after-school activities. As I fished around in my bag for my keys, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had the weirdest feeling I was being watched. I glanced around but didn't see anyone. Shaking it off, I unlocked my car and tossed my backpack in the passenger seat. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn around, a hand clamped over my mouth and an arm wrapped around my chest, yanking me backwards. I tried to scream but only managed a muffled yelp. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. A gravelly voice whispered in my ear, "Don't make a sound or you're dead." I nodded frantically, tears already streaming down my face. The hand moved from my mouth, and I felt something cold and metallic press against my lower back. A gun. "Give me your backpack and all the cash you've got on you. Now." My hands shaking, I grabbed my backpack from the car and held it out behind me. The guy snatched it away. I heard him unzip it and start rummaging through. "Where's the rest of it?" he growled. "What?" I stammered. "Don't play dumb with me, little girl. I know you're pushing weight. Where's your stash?" My blood ran cold. How did this guy know about my dealing? Had someone ratted me out? I don't have anything else, I swear," I said, my voice quavering. "That's everything." He was silent for a moment. I held my breath, terrified he was going to shoot me right there in the parking lot. Finally, he spoke again. "If you're lying to me, I'll find out, and I'll be back. Got it?" I nodded vigorously, still too scared to turn around and look at him. "Good. Now get in your car and drive away. Don't look back." The pressure of the gun disappeared from my back. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was no sign of the guy who'd robbed me. I drove aimlessly for hours, too terrified to go home. What if he followed me? What if he came back for more? My mind was racing a mile a minute. When I finally calmed down enough to think straight, I realized how royally screwed I was. That backpack had over $500 cash in it, plus at least a couple ounces of weed and a baggie of pills. Rick was going to be pissed when I couldn't pay him back. And how was I going to explain to my parents that my backpack and all my school stuff was gone? But even worse than all that was the paralyzing fear. This guy knew what I was up to. He could come back any time. Maybe next time he wouldn't let me go so easy. Images of being kidnapped or murdered flashed through my mind. I pulled over on some random side street and broke down sobbing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I was just a kid, in way over my head in a dangerous world I knew nothing about. In that moment, I knew I had to get out. No amount of money was worth living in constant fear like this. I'd rather be broke than dead. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and blocked Rick's number. Then I deleted all my customer contacts. It felt like cutting off a limb. That was thousands of dollars a month I was giving up. But I knew it was the only way. The next few weeks were rough. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I told my parents I'd lost my backpack and had to use my savings to replace my books and laptop. They were mad, but bought the story. Rick tried to get in touch a few times through my aunt, asking why I'd ghosted him. I ignored the messages. Eventually, he gave up. Gradually, the fear started to fade. Weeks turned to months with no sign of the mystery robber. I started to believe maybe I'd gotten lucky. He'd taken what he wanted and moved on. I won't lie, there were times I was tempted to get back in the game, especially when I saw my old customers living it up while I was broke. But then I'd remember the cold metal of that gun against my back, and the temptation would vanish. It's been 2 years now since that day in the parking lot. I'm in college, working a regular job like a normal person. Sometimes it feels like that whole period of my life was just a bad dream. But I know it was real, and I know how close I came to ruining my entire future, or worse. I thank my lucky stars every day for that robbery. As weird as it sounds, it may have saved my life. To any kids out there thinking about dealing, trust me, it's not worth it. The money's good, but the danger is real. Get out while you still can. I did, and I've never looked back. I still can't believe what happened in our quiet little neighborhood in Fredericksburg. It's been months, but I'm struggling to process it all. I keep replaying everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it. My dad was always a friendly guy, the type to chat with anyone he met while out walking our dog. He'd stop and pet other people's dogs too. There was this one teenager who lived a few blocks over that Dad would often run into. The kid had this big, goofy golden retriever that my dad absolutely adored. He'd always take a few minutes to ruffle the dog's ears and chat with the boy. I remember Dad mentioning him a few times, said he seemed like a nice, polite kid. Maybe a little quiet and shy, but friendly enough. Just a normal teenager as far as anyone could tell. Then one day in late August, everything changed. I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a local news article that made my blood run cold. A 17-year-old from our neighborhood had been arrested for murder. As I read further, the details only got more horrific. The victim was Dylan Wetzel, a 15-year-old who had gone missing a few weeks earlier. Apparently, this teenager had lured Dylan to his house somehow, then killed him and, I can barely bring myself to type this, dismembered his body. The article said body parts were found scattered in wooded areas around town. I felt physically ill reading it. But the worst was yet to come. When I saw the name and photo of the killer, I nearly dropped my phone. It was him, the seemingly ordinary kid with the golden retriever, the one my dad had been unknowingly befriending all this time. I called my dad right away, my voice shaking as I told him to check the news. There was a long silence on the other end of the line when he realized. "Oh my God," he finally said quietly. "I was just petting that dog last week. How could I not have known?" The whole neighborhood was in shock. This kind of thing just doesn't happen here. Fredericksburg is a quiet, historic town. The scariest thing that usually happens is someone speeding down the cobblestone streets. To think there had been a murderer living among us this whole time, it was surreal. In the days that followed, more gruesome details emerged. Apparently, the kid had been planning this for months. He'd built a soundproofed room in his basement where he carried out the murder. Police found journals detailing his sick fantasies and plans. What haunted me most was thinking of all those times my dad had casually chatted with him. Had the evil already been there, lurking behind that ordinary facade? Had he been planning his crime even as he stood there smiling and talking about the weather? The thought made my skin crawl. My dad was really shaken up by it all. He kept saying he should have noticed something, should have picked up on some sign that something was off about the kid. But how could he have known? None of us had any clue. The boy's own parents were blindsided by it. For weeks afterwards, I found myself looking at everyone differently. That friendly cashier, the mailman, the nice old lady next door. Did I really know any of them? What secrets might they be hiding? It sounds paranoid, I know, but after something like this happens so close to home, it's hard not to question everything. The neighborhood changed after that. People were warier, less trusting. Parents wouldn't let their kids play outside unsupervised anymore. There was a heaviness in the air, like a dark cloud hanging over us all. I couldn't stop thinking about Dylan and his family. To lose a child is unimaginable, but in such a horrific way. I can't even fathom their pain. A few of us from the neighborhood went to the memorial service. Seeing his parents' grief-stricken faces is something I'll never forget. As the case progressed through the legal system, we learned more disturbing information. Apparently, the killer had been fascinated with serial killers and had studied their methods. He'd chosen Dylan at random, stalking him for weeks before making his move. The level of premeditation was chilling. What struck me was how easily he had blended in all that time. He went to school, worked a part-time job at the local grocery store, walked his dog, all while harboring these monstrous urges. How many times had I passed him in the cereal aisle, oblivious to the evil beneath the surface? The trial was a media circus. News vans clogged our streets for weeks. Reporters ambushed anyone who had known the killer, desperate for quotes or inside information. My dad was approached several times because of his casual acquaintance with the boy. He refused to talk to them, but it was clear the whole thing was eating him up inside. I tried to comfort him, telling him there was no way he could have known, but I could see the guilt weighing on him. He kept wondering if there was something he should have noticed, some red flag he'd missed. The rational part of me knew that was ridiculous. The kid had fooled everyone, including his own family. But I understood the impulse to search for answers, to try and make sense of the senseless. As more evidence came out in court, the full extent of the killer's depravity became clear. He'd kept souvenirs from his crime, hidden in a locked box in his closet. He'd taken photos of the victim post-mortem. The prosecution painted a picture of a remorseless psychopath who killed for the thrill of it. The defense tried to argue insanity, but the jury wasn't buying it. In the end, he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life without parole. There was a collective sigh of relief in the community when the verdict came down. At least he'd never be able to hurt anyone else. But even with him locked away, things didn't go back to normal. How could they? We'd lost our sense of safety, our belief in the basic goodness of our neighbors. Every unknown face on the street now held a potential threat. I found myself jumping at small noises, double-checking the locks before bed. Logically, I knew the danger had passed, but my nerves were shot. I'd lie awake at night, imagining worst-case scenarios, wondering if there were other predators hiding in plain sight around us. My dad stopped taking his evening walks for a long time. When he finally started again, he'd flinch every time he saw someone with a dog. The simple pleasure he'd once taken in those casual encounters was gone, replaced by wariness and painful memories. It's been almost a year now, and things are slowly getting better. The media frenzy has died down. We're learning to trust again, to not see danger lurking behind every smile. But there's still an undercurrent of unease. I don't think this town will ever be quite the same. Sometimes I wonder about that golden retriever. What happened to it after its owner was arrested? Did it sense the evil in him, or was it as deceived as the rest of us? I hope it found a good home with people who will love it. I've thought a lot about evil since all this happened. How it can hide in the most mundane places, behind the most ordinary faces. I'd always imagined monsters as obvious villains, but now I know the truth is far more insidious. The real monsters walk among us undetected, blending in perfectly until the moment they strike. I don't mean to sound paranoid. Most people are good. I truly believe that. But this experience has taught me to trust my instincts more, to be aware of my surroundings, and to never take the safety of my community for granted again. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that you never really know what's going on beneath the surface. The friendly teenager petting a dog could be hiding unimaginable darkness. It's a terrifying thought, but it's the reality we live in. All we can do is look out for each other and hope that love and goodness will ultimately triumph over evil. But I'll never forget that summer when our quiet neighborhood was shattered by unspeakable horror. The memory of it lingers like a bad dream, a reminder that the darkest threats can come from the most unexpected places. It was close to midnight, and we were on a remote stretch of highway, surrounded by nothing but darkness and cacti. Amy had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, and I was fighting to stay awake myself. The monotonous rumble of tires on asphalt was almost hypnotic. Suddenly, bright headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, jolting me to full alertness. A large truck was rapidly approaching from behind. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably just another traveler in a hurry. But as it got closer, I realized it was going way too fast. Before I could react, the truck was right on my bumper, blinding me with its high beams. My heart started racing. What was this guy's problem? I sped up, hoping he would pass, but he matched my speed exactly, staying mere feet from my rear bumper. I tapped my brakes, trying to get him to back off. Big mistake. The truck responded by ramming into me hard, causing my car to fishtail. I gripped the wheel with white knuckles, barely keeping control as we swerved across the empty road. The impact jolted Amy awake. "Dad, what's happening?" she asked groggily. "It's okay, honey. Just some idiot tailgating us," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as panic rose in my throat. "Put your seatbelt on tight." I floored the gas pedal, pushing my sedan to its limits. The speedometer climbed past 90, then 100 mph, but it wasn't enough. The truck stuck to us like glue, engine roaring. Adrenaline coursing through me, I racked my brain for a plan. There were no turnoffs or towns for miles, no other cars on the road. Just us and this maniac. I weaved back and forth, trying to shake him. He mimicked every move. When I swerved right, he swerved right. When I jerked left, he was right there. It was like he could read my mind. "Dad, I'm scared," Amy whimpered. I reached over and squeezed her hand, wishing I could tell her it would be okay. But I honestly didn't know if we'd make it out of this. The truck rammed us again. Harder this time. The impact sent us spinning. I fought the wheel, tires screeching as we spun in circles. Miraculously, I managed to straighten us out without flipping. But now we were facing the wrong way on the highway, the truck's headlights blinding us. In that moment of stillness, I got my first clear look at our pursuer. It was a massive semi-truck, its grille gleaming menacingly in the moonlight. The windows were tinted black. I couldn't see the driver at all. As we sat there, I expected him to finish us off, but he just idled there, engine growling. Was he toying with us? I knew we only had seconds before he charged. Making a split-second decision, I cranked the wheel hard and floored it, shooting off the road into the desert. It was insane and dangerous, but I saw no other choice. We bounced violently over the rough terrain, dodging cacti and rocks. The truck followed, kicking up a massive dust cloud behind it. I had hoped the uneven ground would slow him down, but incredibly, he seemed even faster off-road. The gap between us narrowed with each passing second. That's when an idea hit me. It was risky, but it was all I had left. "Amy, hold on tight," I yelled. Then I killed the headlights and engine, plunging us into total darkness. We coasted silently through the pitch-black desert. I could hear Amy's ragged breathing beside me, feel her trembling. I reached for her hand again, squeezing it reassuringly, even as my own heart threatened to burst from my chest. The truck roared past us, its headlights illuminating the empty desert ahead. He thought we were still in front of him. I waited until he was a good distance away, then quietly restarted the engine and flipped on the lights. Throwing the car in reverse, I carefully backtracked to the highway. Once back on the road, I gunned it in the opposite direction, praying the truck wouldn't notice. Minutes ticked by as I pushed the car to its limits, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw lights in the distance. A gas station. I pulled in, tires squealing, and shut off the engine. We sat there in silence for a long moment, both of us shaking. Is it over?" Amy asked in a small voice. I pulled her into a tight hug. "Yeah, sweetie, I think it's over." We ended up spending the rest of the night in that gas station parking lot, too afraid to get back on the road. When dawn finally broke, we cautiously continued home without incident. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened that night. Who was driving that truck? Why did they target us? I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times, but it never makes any more sense. We filed a police report, but with so little to go on, nothing ever came of it. I've scoured news reports and online forums, hoping to find similar stories that might shed some light. But I've found nothing concrete. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I see the dents in my rear bumper, feel phantom jolts from those brutal impacts, and I know it was real. Amy and I don't talk about it much, but I know it haunts her too. She won't drive on highways at night anymore. Neither will I, if I'm honest. I've considered moving us back to California, back to the safety of crowded freeways and city lights. But something keeps me here. Maybe it's stubbornness, refusing to be chased away. Or maybe it's a need for closure, a hope that someday I'll find answers. All I know for sure is that I'll never forget that night. The terror, the helplessness, the certainty that we were going to die on that lonely stretch of road. It changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. So if you're ever driving through the Arizona desert late at night and see headlights approaching fast in your rear view, don't assume it's just another traveler. It might be something much worse, something that can't be explained or outrun, something that's still out there waiting for its next victim. Be safe out there, and always keep your gas tank full. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. It was supposed to be a normal Saturday afternoon hanging out with my best friend Haley at the park near my house. We were both 15 at the time and loved going to Oak Ridge Park to walk the trails, swing on the playground, and just talk about life. The park was pretty big, with lots of wooded areas and hiking paths winding through the hills. It was usually pretty quiet there, which is why we liked it. That day started out totally normal. Haley came over around 2 p.m., and we decided to walk to the park like we always did. It was a beautiful sunny day in May, not too hot yet. We were chatting and laughing as we made our way down the street towards the park entrance. As soon as we got there, I felt a weird vibe. I can't really explain it, but something just felt off. The park seemed emptier than usual. We didn't see any other people around, which was strange for a Saturday afternoon. I mentioned it to Haley, but she just shrugged it off, saying it was nice to have the place to ourselves. We started walking down one of the main trails that looped around the park. About 10 minutes in, I got that creepy feeling again, like we were being watched. I kept glancing behind us but didn't see anyone. Haley was in the middle of telling me about some drama with her mom, so I tried to focus on that and calm my nerves. Another 5 minutes passed, and I heard a twig snap somewhere off to our right. I whipped my head around to look, but again saw nothing but trees and bushes. My heart started racing. I grabbed Haley's arm and whispered, "Did you hear that?" She looked confused and said no. I told her I thought I heard something in the woods. She listened for a second, but didn't hear anything unusual. "You're being paranoid," she laughed. "It was probably just a squirrel or something." I tried to laugh it off too, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We kept walking, but I was on high alert now, straining to hear any unusual sounds. A few minutes later, I definitely heard footsteps crunching on leaves, coming from behind us. I spun around, and that's when I saw him, a man in a dark hoodie about 50 feet back on the trail. He quickly ducked behind a tree when I turned. "Haley, there's someone following us," I hissed, grabbing her arm. Her eyes went wide. "What? Where?" "Back there, behind that big oak tree. I saw him duck behind it when I turned around." We both stared at the tree, hardly daring to breathe. After a few seconds, a head peeked out from behind it. Even from that distance, I could see the man's eyes lock onto us. A chill ran down my spine. "Oh my God," Haley whispered. "What do we do?" "Let's just walk faster," I said. "Maybe he's just a hiker and we're being paranoid." We picked up our pace, practically speed walking down the trail. I kept glancing back and saw the man emerge from behind the tree. He started walking in our direction, matching our increased speed. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "He's following us," I told Haley. "We need to run." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed her hand and we took off running down the trail. I heard heavy footsteps behind us and risked a look back. The man was full on, sprinting after us now, closing the distance quickly. Pure terror coursed through me. This was really happening. Some creep was chasing us through a deserted park and we were trapped. "We need to get off the trail," I yelled to Haley. "Into the woods." We veered off the path and crashed through the underbrush. Branches whipped at our faces and arms as we ran. I could hear the man crashing through the woods behind us, getting closer. We burst out of the trees into a small clearing. To our right was an 8-foot concrete wall, the back of the gated community that bordered the park. To our left, more dense forest. "The wall!" Haley cried. "We have to climb it." We sprinted to the wall and I boosted Haley up. She scrambled to the top and reached down to pull me up just as the man emerged from the trees. He was only about 20 feet away now. I could see his face clearly for the first time. He had wild eyes and a crazed expression that made my blood run cold. With a surge of adrenaline, I jumped and grabbed Haley's hands. She pulled with all her might as I pushed off the wall with my feet. I could feel the man's fingers brush my ankle just as I got high enough to swing my leg over the top. We tumbled down the other side of the wall, landing hard on a manicured lawn. I heard furious pounding and scraping on the other side as the man tried to climb over after us. Haley and I scrambled to our feet and ran towards the nearest house, screaming for help. An older man came out onto his porch, looking confused. "Please help us," I cried. "There's a man chasing us." The man's eyes widened as he took in our terrified expressions and disheveled appearance. He quickly ushered us inside and locked the door behind us. "What happened? Are you girls okay?" he asked, as Haley and I tried to catch our breath. Between gasps, we explained about the man chasing us in the park. The homeowner, who introduced himself as Bob, immediately called the police. As we waited for them to arrive, I called my parents. My mom answered, and I burst into tears as soon as I heard her voice. Through my sobs, I managed to tell her where we were and what happened. She said they were on their way. The police showed up about 10 minutes later. We gave our statements, describing the man and what had occurred. They took our information and said they'd increase patrols in the area. My parents and Haley's mom arrived shortly after. There were lots of hugs and tears as we recounted the story again. I've never been so relieved to see my parents in my life. It turned out that Bob, the man who let us in, was actually my uncle's neighbor. Small world. My uncle came over when he heard what happened and drove us all home. The police never caught the guy who chased us. They said there had been a few other reports of a suspicious man in the park over the past month, but no one had gotten a clear description before. It's been almost a year now, and I still have nightmares about that day sometimes. I can't shake the image of that man's crazed eyes as he chased us. Haley and I don't go to that park anymore. We don't really go anywhere alone now. I keep wondering what would have happened if we hadn't made it over that wall, or if Bob hadn't been home, or if the man had caught up to us in the woods. It makes me sick to think about. I'm sharing this as a warning to always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. We should have left the park as soon as I got that first weird feeling. And always be aware of your surroundings, especially in isolated areas. I'm so grateful that Haley and I made it out okay that day. But I know we got lucky. I'll never take my safety for granted again. That experience changed me forever. There was this new guy at school, Leo. He'd just moved from Guatemala and didn't really fit in with anyone. I felt bad for him and tried to be friendly, smiling and saying hi in the hallways. Looking back, I realized that was probably my first mistake. At first, Leo seemed shy but nice enough. He'd wave back or give a small smile, but then I started noticing him everywhere. In the cafeteria, by my locker, even waiting outside my classes. It was like he'd memorized my schedule. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. Then the texts started. Random numbers I didn't recognize, sending messages at all hours. "You look beautiful today. I love your laugh. We're meant to be together." I blocked every number, but new ones just kept coming. The pit in my stomach grew with each ping of my phone. I confided in my best friend, Jess. She thought I should tell a teacher or my parents, but I was embarrassed. What if I was overreacting? What if they didn't believe me? So I kept quiet, hoping it would blow over. But it only got worse. One day I opened my locker to find a note with a rose. The handwriting was unmistakably Leo's. "My heart beats only for you," it said. I felt sick. I started changing up my routines, taking different routes to class, eating lunch in empty classrooms. But somehow, he always found me. I'd catch glimpses of him watching me from across the parking lot or lurking near the gym after practice. Things escalated when I started getting DMs on social media from fake accounts. They were clearly Leo, using broken English and saying the same creepy things as the texts. But the worst part was the photos. Somehow, he'd gotten pictures of me, in class, at the mall with friends, even one through my bedroom window. I felt violated and terrified. I finally broke down and told my parents. They were furious, immediately calling the school and the police. But there wasn't much that could be done. Leo denied everything, and without concrete proof, it was just my word against his. The school promised to keep an eye on things, but it didn't help. Leo became more subtle, but I could still feel his eyes on me constantly. I started having panic attacks, unable to focus in class or sleep at night. My grades slipped, and I withdrew from my friends. Every shadow, every unexpected noise made me jump. My parents decided enough was enough. We moved to a new city, hoping for a fresh start. I deleted all my social media, changed my phone number, and tried to put it all behind me. For a while, it seemed to work. I started to feel like myself again, making new friends and actually enjoying school. But then, 3 months after the move, it started again. A text from an unknown number. "I miss you. We belong together." My blood ran cold. How had he found me? The cycle began anew. Messages, fake social media accounts, photos that shouldn't exist. I became a prisoner in my own life, afraid to go out, constantly looking over my shoulder. My new friends couldn't understand why I was so jumpy and paranoid all the time. The worst moment came on my 18th birthday. I woke up to find my car covered in red roses, with a card that simply said, "Soon." I completely broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. My parents called the police again, but there was no evidence of who had done it. This went on for 3 long years, 3 years of constant fear, of feeling like I was losing my mind. I tried everything, restraining orders, private investigators, even a brief stint in therapy. Nothing seemed to stop Leo's obsession. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. No more texts, no more photos, no more creepy gifts. At first, I was relieved. But as days turned into weeks with no contact, I found myself almost more anxious. Was he planning something big? Was this just the calm before the storm? It's been 6 months now since the last message. I should feel free, but I don't. I still check over my shoulder everywhere I go. I still have nightmares about Leo showing up at my door. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all, if maybe I blew things out of proportion, or if it was all some elaborate prank. But then I remember the fear, the sleepless nights, the way my heart would race every time my phone buzzed. It was real, too real. I'm sharing this now because I want others to know they're not alone. Stalking and obsession aren't just things that happen in movies. They're real, and they're terrifying. If you're going through something like this, please don't stay silent. Tell someone. Get help. Don't let fear rule your life like I did. I don't know where Leo is now or why he finally stopped. Part of me hopes he got the help he clearly needed. Another part hopes he's rotting in jail somewhere. Mostly, I just hope I never have to see or hear from him again. I'm trying to move on with my life. I've started college, made new friends, even gone on a few dates. But there's always that lingering fear in the back of my mind. Will he come back? Will I ever truly be free? For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm learning to trust again, to enjoy life without constantly looking over my shoulder. It's not easy, but I refuse to let Leo win. He took 3 years of my life, but he won't take my future. To anyone out there dealing with a stalker or an obsessed person, you're not alone. It's not your fault. And there is hope. Stay strong, stay safe, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Your peace of mind is worth fighting for. As for me, I'm still healing, still jumping at shadows sometimes. But I'm also laughing more, dreaming more, living more. Leo may have haunted my past, but he doesn't get to control my future. I'm reclaiming my life, one day at a time, and that's a victory he can never take away from me. I was only 13 when it happened, but that day at the beach is seared into my memory forever. It was supposed to be just another lazy summer afternoon, the kind where you wander aimlessly, lost in daydreams, with no real plans or worries. If only I'd known how quickly things could go so terribly wrong. My dog Max and I set out for our usual walk along the shoreline. The beach was pretty empty that day, just a few elderly couples strolling hand in hand in the distance. I breathed in the salty air, feeling relaxed as Max trotted happily beside me. We walked for a while before turning into the little wooded area that borders the sand. I always loved that shady path, the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, the crunch of twigs under my feet. It felt like our own private hideaway. About 10 minutes into the woods, I started to get an uneasy feeling. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck, like you're being watched? At first I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but then Max's ears perked up and he let out a low growl. That's when I knew something was really wrong. I glanced over my shoulder and my heart nearly stopped. There was a man following us, maybe 50 feet back, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes despite the heat. He was walking quickly, clearly trying to catch up. I picked up my pace, hoping I was overreacting. But when I looked back again, he had closed the gap to about 30 feet. And now I could see his face, gaunt cheeks, deep-set eyes that seemed to burn right through me. A chill ran down my spine. I started to jog, tugging Max along with me. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I scream for help? Try to lose him in the woods? Make a run for the open beach? Before I could decide, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, getting closer by the second. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a full sprint. Max was barking now, sensing my fear. I could hear the man's ragged breathing as he chased us. Branches whipped at my face, but I didn't slow down. My lungs were burning, legs trembling. I knew I couldn't outrun him for long. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I burst through the tree line back onto the beach. Relief flooded through me at the sight of other people, even though they were still pretty far away. But my moment of hope was short-lived. As I ran towards the water, desperately scanning for someone to help, I realized with horror that the man wasn't alone. A woman had emerged from the woods and was running parallel to us, trying to cut off my escape route to the right. She looked to be in her 30s, with wild red hair flying behind her as she sprinted across the sand. The sight of her filled me with a new wave of terror. This wasn't just some random creep. It was a coordinated attack. I veered left, away from both of them, my feet slipping in the loose sand. Max was still barking furiously, but it sounded distant and muffled over the pounding of blood in my ears. I screamed for help at the top of my lungs, praying someone would hear me. The couple I'd seen earlier finally looked up, but they were so far away. Even if they realized what was happening, they'd never reach me in time. Tears streamed down my face as I pushed myself to run faster than I ever had in my life. But I could feel myself tiring, my movements becoming clumsy and uncoordinated. The woman was gaining on me quickly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her reaching out, fingers grasping for my shirt. I let out another desperate scream, my voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. This couldn't be happening. Any second now they would grab me and drag me away. I'd never see my family again. I'd become another missing person statistic, my fate unknown. Just as I felt the woman's hand brush against my back, a car horn blared nearby. Tires screeched on pavement, and a blue minivan came tearing down the beach access road, kicking up sand. For a split second, I was sure it was going to hit us. But then the driver's side door flew open, and a woman leapt out. "Get in the car now," she screamed. I didn't hesitate. I changed course and sprinted towards the van, practically diving through the open sliding door. Max jumped in after me, still barking his head off. I scrambled to pull the door shut as the woman jumped back in the driver's seat. As we peeled away, I got one last glimpse of my pursuers. They had stopped running and were just standing there, staring after us with blank expressions. The image is burned into my brain. The tall man's hollow eyes, the woman's fiery hair whipping in the wind. Then we turned a corner and they disappeared from view. I collapsed onto the floor of the van, gasping for air and shaking uncontrollably. Max curled up next to me, whimpering softly. It took me a few minutes to catch my breath enough to speak. "Thank you," I finally managed to stammer out between sobs. "You saved my life." The woman looked back at me, her face pale and drawn. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" I shook my head, still trembling. "No, I'm all right. They almost had me, but how did you know? Why were you there?" She took a deep breath, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I was supposed to pick up my daughter and her friend from the beach. When I got there, I couldn't find them anywhere. Then I heard screaming." Her voice trailed off and she swallowed hard before continuing. "I saw you running from those people, and I just knew. I knew they had done something to the girls. I couldn't let them take you too." A fresh wave of tears spilled down my cheeks as the reality of the situation hit me. Those poor girls. If their mom hadn't shown up when she did, I would have ended up just like them. The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. "We need to call the police," I said, my voice shaky but determined. "We have to find your daughter and her friend." The woman nodded, pulling over to the side of the road. As she dialed 911 with shaking hands, I hugged Max tightly, burying my face in his fur. I was safe now, but I knew the nightmare was far from over. Those people were still out there, and 2 girls were still missing. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and frantic phone calls. My parents rushed to the station to pick me up, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. I was examined by paramedics, questioned by detectives, asked to look at mugshots, but nothing came of it. The man and woman seemed to have vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks. Search parties combed the woods and beach. Missing person flyers plastered every storefront in town. But there was no trace of the 2 girls. It was like they'd simply ceased to exist. As for me, I was left with nightmares, panic attacks, and a paralyzing fear of being alone. I couldn't go near the beach or any wooded areas. Even walking Max around the block made my heart race. My parents tried to help: therapy, medication, a home security system. But nothing could erase the memory of those hollow eyes boring into me, or the feeling of a hand just barely brushing my back. It's been 5 years now. The case has gone cold. Most people in town avoid talking about it, like they're afraid to remember. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. But then I'll catch a glimpse of a tall, thin man on the street and my blood runs cold. Or I'll see a flash of red hair and my chest tightens in panic.